America is now under martial law. See how easy it is to manipulate people into embracing fascism by putting some bad guy in a turban on TV every day. You asked for it, you got it. Well, we all have to be patriotic now, right? And there's only one way to be patriotic, isn't there? Pledging allegiance to the war. How many of you have pledged allegiance to the war? The war against terrorism, abbreviated TWAT for all practical purposes. How many of you are glad we're kicking ass in Afghanistan? I heard initial cheers go up and then everybody caught themselves. Don't be afraid. Come out of the closet. Even though he stole the election, one of the saddest factors of this country is even though half the country doesn't vote, which is disgraceful enough, 1 in every 4 American adults went out and voted for George W. Bush. Be afraid. Be very afraid. Isn't it interesting that whenever somebody named Bush gets into the White House, many people die? I'd like to read a little statistic for you now from the April 2002 edition of Harper's Magazine. Every issue of Harper's has this page called the Harper's Index with all kinds of mind-blowing statistics on them. Here's one. Estimated amount of U.S. dollars spent guarding our Mid-Eastern oil supply in the Persian Gulf. $50 billion. Estimated value of the crude oil coming out of the Persian Gulf, $19 billion. What is wrong with this picture? I don't like Osama bin Laden or Islamic fundamentalists either, especially the way they treat women, and I want to be safe from terrorism too. But I get equally frightened when somebody like George Bush comes out and says things like,
"You're either with us or with the terrorists."
Some choice. Where somehow we have to follow them clear over a cliff to a full-scale invasion of Iraq and burn every single bridge of goodwill we ever build in that part of the world, in Europe, and maybe even in this country as well. Now is the time to stand up and say, yo, we are not with Bush or the terrorists. And start asking the question, is what we're doing over there really the best way to solve this problem? Or will this short-term orgy of feel-good violence bring much bigger problems down the road? In 1991, Jimmy Carter publicly warned the last George Bush that his Gulf War would set back peace in Middle Eastern relations at least 20 years. Now what happens? Now what do we do? I fear a mass slaughter of innocent civilians already far greater than what went down at the World Trade Center with the clown prince of the Texas oil barons handed the keys to weapons of mass destruction. While Israel is being dragged down the toilet by its own Saddam Hussein, and his name is Ariel Sharon. I fear governments all over the world rounding up and attacking anybody who opposes their policies for any reason on the grounds that they are aiding terrorism. Kind of like the United States did when we locked up thousands of labor activists and immigrants in the 1920s for the crime of opposing World War I. And nobody has been more cynical about manipulating how upset we are and how fearful we are after what went down on September 11th and our sorrow for the victims and their families than the Bush administration themselves. Their bodies are barely cold in the ground, and Bush's people are already pissing on their memories.
In order to fight terrorism, we have to drill for oil in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge.
That'll show them. Just kill off all them caribou and all them bears and melt the tundra. And the oil, by the way, last time they were bringing this up, was earmarked for China. And right after September 11th, both houses of Congress passed a bill ordering 100 more tanker jets for the Air Force, right after the Air Force said they didn't need them. And Bush says that in order to fight terrorism, we have to give him alone so-called fast-track authority to ram through treaties like the Free Trade Agreement of the Americas that makes NAFTA and the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, the GATT treaty that gave us our lovely friends, the WTO, look nice by comparison. Free Trade Agreement of the Americas is designed to let any private company shake down any other country for sanctions anywhere North, South America, Caribbean, Central America. Only Castro isn't invited. Shake them down for blood money and sanctions for failure to privatize their water supply. You know, they tried that in Bolivia, and Bechtel raised the rates of the peasants up 300%, and people rioted in Cochabamba until Bechtel got driven out. So now Bechtel has gone to another obscure trade tribunal whose name I can't even remember, demanding that the Bolivian government be ordered to pay them $25 million in blood money. That's the scam. They also want to be able to go after people for failure to privatize the school system. And even now, under NAFTA, UPS, United Parcel Service, is suing the government of Canada for interfering with their profits by having their own postal service. That'll show the evil ones. And anybody who says this sort of globalization uber alles and signing over our constitutional rights and our sovereignty to corporations is somehow wrong and fights globalization, well, you oppose the corporate agenda, you must be a terrorist too. Wall Street Journal, Prime Minister of Italy, Silvio Berlusconi, who's kind of like a cross between Mussolini, the Godfather, and Ronald McDonald rolled into one. They all said that the people protesting in Seattle and in Geneva and Italy and other places caused the World Trade Center bombings and are therefore terrorists for fighting corporate rule. And people who come out and oppose it in this country sometimes have all kinds of hell to pay. Bill Maher, you'll notice politically incorrect, is not going to be on the air anymore. One of the things that took him down, it appears, was he said, I thought it was not only just a perfectly innocent remark, but very well taken, that yes, it was something to the effect of, yes, it was cowardly to be flying planes into those buildings in New York and killing all those innocent people. It's also cowardly to be shelling somebody else's country from missiles fired from 2,000 miles away. And Bill Maher's reward for that was sponsors pulled their ads out of politically incorrect, local station affiliates canceled the show, Bush's press secretary Ari Fleischer hopped on the bandwagon saying people have to watch what they say and watch what they do. Yeah. And stamping that down even further is Dick Cheney's wife, Lynn Cheney, who you haven't heard much about so far, but she's like the Tipper Gore of the academic world and has been that way for many, many years. For a while under Reagan-Bush regime number one, although I kind of call them the Reagan-Bush-Clinton regime when you look at their policy consistency over the years. Anyway, she was head of the National Endowment for the Humanities and began pulling grants for any project a school wanted that she deemed political. But of course, if it was beneficial to corporations or the right wing, then it was patriotically correct instead of politically correct, and it was okay. Well, now she's part of the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, who also had Joseph Lieberman on board for quite a while, who announced that the weakest link, yes, you are the weakest link, in the war on terrorism is college professors. and listed 117 unpatriotic acts that they thought didn't just warrant a few demerits and finger wagging from Lynn Cheney and Lieberman. No, they ought to all be fired for things like saying in a classroom at the University of Oregon that we need to understand the reasons for people's hatred of us in the Middle East. What makes these people so powerful is they sit on $3 billion in grant money to schools every year. So that's how they can influence what is taught in the schools. And meanwhile, all kinds of things are flying this way and that and flying under the radar screen, like the New York Times nonchalantly mentioning in an editorial, oh yeah, in the next 5 years we're going to double the size of the CIA. Great. They did such a wonderful job with such a conscientious approach the first time around. Let's have twice as much of them. And you may have noticed that the Bush administration is hell-bent on sealing government records right, left, and center. Nobody can read any of the papers from not only Bush's father's administration for some strange reason, but the Reagan administration too, because it might disclose some of the little nasty things they did then, I guess. And they also were hell-bent on sealing all the records of Cheney's meetings with executives from the Enron Corporation on how to solve the manufactured energy crisis that Enron and Ross Perot, among others, helped start in the first place. And the Democratic Party, true to form, has been totally spineless in truly pursuing just how horrific the Enron scandal and WorldCom, Adelphia, and the rest of them really is, and how many more there are to come. Instead, Mr. Law and Order, Attorney General John Ashcraft has given us the USA Patriot Act, which most of Congress didn't even bother to read. Only one senator voted against it in the Senate, meaning the other 49 Democrats, as well as the Republicans, did. Only 66 in the House as well. And look what we've done since then. Rounded up 5,000 people, locked them in prison for the crime of having a Middle Eastern last name or the wrong color skin or being in the wrong place at the right time. So now they say there's still 1,200 immigrants being held incommunicado somewhere for some reason. Who are they? Why are they there? Where are they? They won't tell us. Even Amnesty International has been able to find out a little and slapped us in the face with a report saying we were keeping a lot of these people in solitary confinement, in shackles, not allowing them to exercise, see a lawyer, call their family, nothing. And the FBI justifies this by saying, well, we had to round up all these people because this Al-Qaeda thing we somehow never quite noticed before is a mosaic. And we have to decide which of these people fit into the mosaic. And hey, if we get 50 informants out of these people, that's 50 more than we have now. In other words, you're yanked away from your family, you're thrown in chains and solitary for damn near close to a year now. You're suddenly going to want a narc for the FBI? Something doesn't make sense here. And Bushcroft says that we're going to have military tribunals now, anywhere in the world. Try anybody we think is a suspected terrorist or enemy of the United States, and if a few of the people on the tribunal vote to execute the person who's not allowed a lawyer or a defense or anything else, we just kill them. Have we done it already? Nobody knows. Can you imagine the outrage if Saddam Hussein or even Canada sent their army into this country and tried somebody they didn't happen to like for unspecified crimes against the state and killed them and then left town? How would we feel? How would the Bush mob feel, for that matter? And they define suspected terrorist as anybody who attempts to influence the policy of a government, doesn't say which one, by intimidation or coercion. Kind of like what we're trying to do to Iraq and the Palestinian people, among others. But that's such a wide umbrella, that could include peaceful sit-ins, marches, protests of the kind Earth First and the anti-globalization people are so good at. Are we going to drag in people for terrorism charges for daring to be seen in a cardboard turtle suit now? Boycotts could fall under this. The sort of pranks I have such a soft spot in my heart for could as well. The way it's written, you could be aiding a terrorist organization if some other charity you gave money to or helped out was named as a terrorist organization after the fact or was supposedly linked to another one or something. They tried this during Reagan-Bush regime number 1, and the way the law was written then as now, it would have meant that if you'd given Nelson Mandela a ride to the airport after he talked to a basketball coliseum full of people about apartheid in South Africa, you could go to jail for aiding a terrorist, because up until almost the day Mandela was president of South Africa and the white regime was out, the CIA had his party, the African National Congress, on their list of terrorist organizations. Same as if you helped out CISPES or Witness for Peace or any of the people trying to stop all the death squad bloodbaths in Central America who had offices here that the FBI broke into, if that sounds familiar. Even if you do wind up one of our new prisoners of the war on terrorism, the Geneva Convention doesn't apply to our country anymore, just other countries and how they treat their prisoners. Therefore, we can take anybody we want out of Afghanistan and lock them in human-sized rat cages out in the sun in Guantanamo Bay in Cuba and leave them there until maybe someday we can think of what to do with them next. Again, how would we react if Muammar Gaddafi or somebody from Iran came in and took people out of this country and locked them in rat cages somewhere in the Persian Gulf? The really scary part of the Patriot Act that I wish the people in Congress would have read is that it now allows the FBI to come into anybody's home without a warrant anytime they want to. Search your place, go through your hard drive, see what you got on your computer, not even tell you they've been there, or then if you do know they've been there, they're going through your business records or something, and you tell somebody else, even a defense attorney, that they've been there, you can go to jail for that, too. So says the Patriot Act. And if that's not enough, this just passed the House of Representatives by a landslide, the Cybersecurity Enhancement Act, which says that for so-called malicious hacking, you can go to prison for life. The Democrats are after our ass too here. That known friend of the common man, Senator Joe Biden of Delaware, has introduced the Reducing Americans' Vulnerability to Ecstasy, otherwise known as the RAVE Act, which means anybody who puts on an event where people are getting down and maybe getting high, failure to keep anybody from using or selling drugs, you can be fined $500,000 and go to jail for 20 years under this law. Better stick to molesting children and serial rape instead. House of Representatives, meanwhile, has the so-called Clean Up Act, where any event promoter who knows or ought to know anybody there is high on anything can go to jail for that. Does this mean if one person lights up a joint at Ozfest, Ozzy and Sharon Osbourne and their kids get locked up too? Or for that matter, what if somebody lights up some weed in the baseball stadium, or they catch Barry Bonds and the rest of them with steroids, gobbling them up down in the dressing room? Does the owner of the Giants go to jail too? That would be an interesting way to see how they enforce that law. And now, Ashcroft has announced that the FBI is going to go back to the kind of dirty spying techniques known as COINTELPRO, as if they ever abandoned it, where they used to infiltrate people like the Black Panthers and the Students for the Democratic Society, American Indian Movement, and try and get them to commit violent acts against each other and throw them all in jail. And all the corporate lackey newspapers in America are saying, 85% of the American people think this is a wonderful idea. Congress thinks it's just a wonderful idea. Well, maybe a few more of them should know that in a courtroom in Oakland, California, Daryl Cherney and the estate of Judy Berry, two Earth First activists who at the time survived an assassination attempt against themselves when a bomb went off in Judy's car and damn near killed her at the time. She's since died of breast cancer. 12 years later, finally, they nail the FBI and the U.S. government for $4 million in damages for violating their civil rights. So the Bushcroft solution to that is just to make it all legal from now on. And the Ashcroft is saying that now they're going to start infiltrating churches, legitimate political organizations, anything they think might be terrorist. FBI's been walking into libraries and bookstores again, trying to shake down the people working there for lists of who checks out what books and rents what movies and all. Yeah. That's going on all over the place now. Even trickling down in local areas, too. The Denver cops got caught red-handed keeping files and sharing them with other agencies on as many as 10,000 people for the crime of attending an Amnesty International meeting or American Friends Service Committee or something like that. This is the same police department that had almost every black person between 14 and 23 or so on their list of suspected gang members. And the Clinton administration admitted they'd begun spying on a lot of the principal organizers of the protests in Seattle after it happened. Even here, BART trains, Bay Area Rapid Transit, the ones that go under the bay from San Francisco to Oakland, Berkeley, etc. So-called BART train cops, now to fight terrorism, they got dogs with them. Up and down the train cars, drug-sniffing dogs, just in case they catch some terrorist with a doobie in their pocket they want to smoke when they get home. That'll show the evil ones for sure. And this has given people like Southwest Airlines, Northwest Airlines, Eli Lilly and Company, and others the excuse to start going back in their employees' records for over a decade or so, and anybody who even got a slap on the wrist for smoking some weed, fired. All in the name of protecting us from the evil ones, in the name of the new buzzy-wuzzy word, Homeland Security. Homeland Security. And who do we put in charge? This guy Tom Ridge, who every time I see a picture of him, the theme from Car 54, Where Are You?, starts running through my head. I mean, the guy whose principal aim as governor seemed to be to execute Mumia Abu-Jamal, and he failed. So now, let's make him head of Homeland Security. And what do they offer us in Bushcroft world for Homeland Security? Operation Tips. Terrorist Information and Prevention System, where they want millions of amateur wannabe snitches. Whenever the mailman or the UPS driver or somebody at the bus station or something starts feeling a little tipsy, they can turn in anybody they want to Ashcroft for potentially terrorist-related activity. It's beginning to look a lot like 1984. Endless war. Bush has said it, Cheney said it, Rumsfeld has said it. We don't know how long the war on terrorism will last. It might last 5 years. It might last 10 years. It could last our entire lifetime. God, this is an even better scam than Vietnam. Well, that's going to explain all these so-called advisors, military advisors we have sent into Colombia, as well as making them the biggest recipient of foreign and military aid besides Israel and Egypt, we say to fight drugs. That's why we have to do this. Well, obviously it's to fight something else as well. Bush has now said he wants to have the Colombian military and therefore the death squad paramilitaries that they work hand in hand with to also be able to use the money we give them to kill guerrillas or indigenous people who attempt to interfere with oil pipelines they want to put through the rainforest. Then Bush, in his State of the Union address, comes out with Iran, Iraq, and North Korea form an axis of evil. He had not cleared that juvenile remark with anybody at the State Department at all. It just blew out of his mouth, kind of like Reagan's Star Wars fantasies. And all that's accomplished is it's totally undermined people who want a more moderate government in Iran that's not run by religious dictators, and we're making real progress there. Now people are going and running back to the mullahs and the ayatollahs because they're scared we're about to bomb them. South Korea, President Kim Dae-jung may have had his career shortened by Bush's little remark. He'd made more progress than anybody has in 50 years in breaking through to North Korea and trying to normalize relations. Now the North Koreans are slamming the doors in his face just like before because they're afraid that Bush and his barnyard friends are about to bomb them too. And sure enough, we then reveal people in the Pentagon with a little too much time on their hands have been drawing up plans to nuke not just the usual targets, but the seven dwarves are not just going to nuke Russia and China and North Korea. You never know when we might need to drop an atomic bomb on Syria or Libya or Iraq. Is Cuba in there too? I can't remember. No, that might blow and devalue real estate in Miami when it becomes radioactive. Can't do that. And as if we haven't learned already, here we are trying to stage coups in other countries. We tried to overthrow democratically elected President Hugo Chavez in Venezuela and replace him with a businessman we'd been meeting with steadily before it happened. It didn't work. So now we're trying to build up more and more people there to get rid of Chavez and put some other wannabe Pinochet in who will do Bush's bidding instead. And they were saying, well, now that we see how these people hide in these caves that we helped them build in Afghanistan, what we need are little trick-or-treat bag size backpack nukes. Little nuclear bombs that G.I. Joe could go up the mountain and roll into the cave and hopefully get all the way back down the mountain before the whole mountain blows up and it avalanches into the valley and maybe even triggers a quake on the other side of the valley. You know, after all, that last big one in Los Angeles was the same day as an underground nuclear test in Nevada. I always wondered about that. But anyway, how irresponsible is this? Little nuclear bombs, anything to save the nuclear bomb industry. How easy is one of those to steal? Even the Pentagon admits that if somebody did steal some of that or figure out how to make them, they'd have a 90% chance of bringing them back into the country and nuking us with them instead. Of course, one way to prevent that would be to not build them at all, but that doesn't seem to be the logic of Bush Incorporated. And if that isn't irresponsible enough, most irresponsible of all, they're saying to fight terrorists, we have to give Reagan his wet dream and Rumsfeld his windfall and put nuclear weapons in outer space. Star Wars, in other words. Even the spineless Democrats are saying, oh, well, maybe we better give it to them after all. Otherwise, we might look soft on terrorism. Space nukes wouldn't have prevented the bombings of the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. It wouldn't have worked. But maybe that's why space nuke toys were never meant to be a defensive weapon. Those are an offensive weapon. The Pentagon says they need them for full spectrum dominance, to protect us from any rogue nation at a time when even when you cross the Canadian border, you'll meet an awful lot of people who think the number one rogue nation in the world today is the United States of America. Full spectrum dominance. It means anybody who does any rogue or potentially terrorist act, like asking Exxon to leave their indigenous lands or something, there's gonna be a laser beam from outer space that's gonna come down and fry your ass. But what happens if one of those toys malfunctions? Crashes back to Earth like the Russian space station Mir did not very long ago. Those things come back into the atmosphere and start burning up. They're going to blow. potentially scattering enough plutonium dust all over our atmosphere. After all, one tiny little speck is enough to give you radiation cancer and kill you. This could potentially kill every breathing creature on the planet. One of those Star Wars weapons malfunctioning scares the hell out of me, far more than Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden and big bad North Korea combined. And meanwhile, they're saying, oh yeah, we've also installed a shadow government of faceless bureaucrats in secret places who will be ready to run the country if anything should happen to our precious Bush administration. In a way, we might be better off with faceless bureaucrats than Cheney and Rumsfeld and the others who run Bush. But I think we've had a shadow government as long as I've been alive, and their names are Shell Oil, IBM, Microsoft, Sony, Disney, General Motors, General Dynamics. That is the shadow government. But not even that is enough for the Bush crowd. They're now saying that the International Criminal Court that Clinton signed off on, and that we've spent years all over the world trying to get this together to bring people like Milosevic and hopefully Pinochet and whoever was responsible for the slaughter in Rwanda and the others to trial, well, it doesn't apply to us. And we will invade any country that attempts to try an American in the International Criminal Court, which is going to be located in The Hague. So this means we're going to be invading Holland now, too. And we also said anybody who signs off on ratifying the treaty for the International Criminal Court, and 139 countries already have, they'll cut off their arms. And then Colin Powell, his congratulatory call to the first president of East Timor was, hey, if you sign on to the International Criminal Court, not one penny in foreign aid for you. And at the same time, with all these scares about terrorists, germ bombs lurking under every rock and bed, who torpedoed a worldwide treaty against manufacturing biological weapons? America pulled out, nuked the treaty, on the grounds that it, quote, did not protect U.S. interests. Specifically, it interfered with our desire to corner the market on bioterror weapons and the biotech industry in general, such as the Office of Naval Research in Arlington, Virginia, has been proposing creating genetically modified bugs they could make that would corrode roads, and they could eat up runways and eat up metal parts and lubricants and plastic and fuel. They call them anti-material biocatalysts. Trouble is, you let them out of the test tube or the bag and they eat up everything else in your enemy's country. Then what do you feed them? And if they're going to do this at Fort Detrick in Maryland, what happens if these bugs creep out like the monkey that was shot up with Ebola that got loose a few years ago? And again, this seems a little irresponsible to me to go into the Frankenbug business and all. And I fear for all the rising number of victims of racial repression against Arab Americans and immigrants of a certain skin color or religious faith. I go to Tallahassee, Florida, and just that week, some rootin' tootin' patriotic American drove his pickup truck through the front door of the local mosque. And last fall, right after 9/11, a guy in, I think it was Mesa, Arizona, outside of Phoenix, was opening his gas station for the first day of business, and somebody in the pickup truck did a drive-by and blew the guy's head off, killed him, because it had a turban on top. And he said as he was led away, I did this because I was standing up for America. And I also fear for what's going to happen to the veterans of this war on terrorism, too. I mean, a lot of people enlist in our armed forces thinking they're going to get job training or college money or an education, and instead they get sent into a war. And we have a great track record of waving our sword and pushing people around and killing thousands and thousands of people at the push of a button, but we have a piss-poor record of how we treat those veterans when they come home from wars, don't we? In San Francisco and so many other places, you see people holding up signs saying, "Homeless Vietnam vet will work for food." Regardless of whether you think as little of the Vietnam War as I do or not, that situation never should have happened. You won't even cop to all the people who got cancer and had kids with all kinds of wild birth defects because of exposure to Agent Orange in the Vietnam War, let alone how many more that happened to in Vietnam itself and still happens to in Vietnam because we never came back and cleaned up all the areas we poisoned with the Agent Orange. After all, it's not our fault. We had nothing to do with the problem. That's the way we treat people who came back with Gulf War syndrome, too. They come back and everybody's, "Oh, rah, rah, Gulf War, George Bush the First is great, support our troops." We didn't support the troops. Once they came down with Gulf War syndrome, we just said, "Fuck them," basically. Come down with blurred vision, spaz attacks, splitting headaches, mental illness, can't sleep sometimes, more cancer, more birth defects. Oh, it's just a coincidence. We had nothing to do with it, is the official policy. And what caused Gulf War syndrome? I mean, was it the experimental anthrax vaccine we made all the soldiers shoot up with and had never been tested on people before we sent them over there? Or was it that Saddam really did have germ bombs, or it was pollution from all the oil well fires? Or maybe did it have a little bit to do with us using shells coated with depleted uranium, which will go right through the armor of a tank and blow it up from the inside. But then what have you got? Radiation. We left a whole area of Kuwait and Iraq like that. We thought that was such a great idea, we used it in the attacks on Milosevic in Kosovo as well. Hey, we got rid of Slobo and his thugs, and now we've made your land radioactive, Kosovars. Come on back. Don't you want to thank us now? And in that little motel room in Tuscaloosa, we observed how the corporate-controlled mass media on the TV were slowly but surely fanning the fires for war. You could tell when they were turning the burner up a little bit by the way the disaster logo would change on the screen. Have you noticed how every scandal or tragedy or disaster instantly has its own logo on television news? Some lucky web geek got the gig to make those up on the spot whenever something really heavy goes down. It started out, "America under attack, tragedy in New York, America responds to America's new war, America fights back." Sure enough, the first person I saw on TV openly call for going to war was the Wicked Witch of San Francisco, Senator Dianne Feinstein. And it began to grow from there. There we were, being conditioned as over and over again you'd see the towers explode as the second plane hit the South Tower. Kaboom! The big fireballs. Bang, bang, bang. CNN had collected the most different angles of the second plane going in, and even one of the first plane. Eventually, every time they got a new one, they had to re-show all the other ones they had in the trophy room. Kaboom! Kaboom! And again, the Trade Center buildings collapsing silently. Even though in New York City it was so loud it registered on the Richter scale, but on TV, silently, with a little John Tesh-style new-agey plinking piano in the background, some sort of sad, melancholy tune. You couldn't help but be emotionally affected and want to make the hurt go away and want to find who's responsible and do something about them. Get them. You couldn't help but imagine what it was like to be in one of those buildings or be on one of those planes, suddenly finding out you're about to get killed. But we also had to be aware of false images that the corporate-controlled mass media has such a long track record of using when they want to lead lemmings off the cliff into a war where some of their boards of directors can make a lot of money. The first one arousing suspicion right then and there on September 11th was CNN's footage of the celebrating Palestinians dancing in the street because they were supposedly so happy that all those people died when the buildings went down in New York. And some people have alleged that that footage was actually from 1991. Others insist it's not. I have no idea, but it is interesting that the woman in the scarf with the big old Cheshire Cat shit-eating grin dancing in the front of the picture had on Peggy Hill glasses, which were pretty far out of vogue even in 1991. The last Gulf War, some of you may remember that there were stories splattered all over the papers and the TV about how the savages in Saddam Hussein's army were storming hospitals in Kuwait and dumping premature babies out of incubators and leaving them to die on the floor as they ran off with the hospital equipment back to Iraq and all. And they trotted out a seemingly shell-shocked young Kuwaiti woman to talk to the media here, and I believe Congress as well, about things are terrible in my country. The Iraqi army is running amok. Please help us save Kuwait for democracy. It turned out the incubator story was planted, and that woman hired by the Hill and Knowlton agency employed by the Kuwaiti royal family to wag the American dog into launching a full-scale war in the Middle East just so they could get their throne back. Democracy be damned. Then again, I think we've always had stuff like this going on. In the early 80s, there was all this hysteria over news reports that a Libyan hit squad had been sent to infiltrate the country to assassinate Ronald Reagan. They even ran sketches of the supposed hit squad in all the papers, which I then wanted to use as a promo photo for Dead Kennedys, but that got vetoed. But later on, they admitted that the whole thing was fiction, and it all came from the fertile mind of a hothead in the White House basement by the name of Oliver North. With that in mind, a piece of me can't help but wonder, and at least ask the question, does Osama bin Laden even exist? We haven't found him yet, have we? And it seems to me that what went down in New York and in D.C. and all the other things they now claim he was responsible for, was it really all done by some evil genius hiding in a cave who supposedly is so sick from kidney disease he needs regular dialysis treatments? Does this mean as we're bombing the caves in Afghanistan, he's running up and down mountains with his dialysis machine, continuing to elude our troops and all? Something doesn't fit here. But by blaming it all on one big evil one, the boogeyman, we've made Osama bin Werewolf an overnight pop star all over the Middle East. They sell candy in Pakistan with his picture on it now. There he is with a little grin and all. And they sell posters in the streets with the buildings going off up above. And you can even call up Osama on the screen on your cell phone over there, too. Dial it up, and there's Osama, and then it morphs into the buildings blowing up and collapsing. Other people see this stuff differently over there, and this is what we've helped inspire. Gulf of Tonkin incident. Another example. In 1964, supposedly some North Vietnamese gunboats supposedly fired on some American boats, and that whipped up enough outrage that President Lyndon Johnson was able to ram a resolution through Congress, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution that, again, hardly anybody voted against because they were scared of being labeled soft on communism, giving President Johnson and the Pentagon, who repeatedly deceived him about the nature of the war, it turns out later, a green light to go into Vietnam and do anything they pleased. What do we get out of that? Almost 60,000 Americans dead. Many, many more, including some of your own parents, scarred for life by that war. Dwarfed by the number of Vietnamese, death toll estimated at 2 to 3 million people, and many, many, many more injured and damaged for life over there. And now, even the corporate media acknowledges as though it's no big deal that for all practical purposes, the Gulf of Tonkin incident didn't happen. Thanks for telling us. We did that at the turn of the last century, too. One ship blows up in a harbor in Cuba and sinks, and then William Randolph Hearst, the one who the Citizen Kane movie was made about, and his granddaughter Patty was kidnapped and now is in John Waters' movies, that Hearst, He was a right-wing newspaper baron. He plastered across all his papers, "Remember the Maine!" That was the name of the ship. "War with Spain! Remember the Maine!" And sure enough, we did. Great excuse to seize the Philippines and Puerto Rico and slaughter 500,000 Filipinos in the process. So with that in mind, what was the Gulf War really about? Oil? Well, I know. I did the Die for Oil Sucker single at the time and all that. But looking back, maybe it wasn't. I mean, what do oil company people care? What do Dick Cheney types care whether or not they're buying their crude from the dictator of Kuwait or the dictator of Iraq? OPEC sets the price. They're going to pay the same regardless. What do they care? So maybe another big reason for that Gulf War was to show off all the fancy new weapons we'd been manufacturing and all. Look at these smart bombs, and these, of course, named the Patriot missiles. And look at these stealth fighter bombers and B-2 bombers and all these new tanks and anti-tank weapons you'll need to blow up those tanks. And they're all for sale. So hey, oil sheiks, hey, dictators and other heads of state, looky here. If you don't buy some of this stuff, someone else will. So is the real Gulf War just an exposition fair to show off new weapons of mass destruction? After all, United States' share of the world arms market after the Gulf War went up from 18% to over 50%. Britain being number 2. And speaking of 1984, have you noticed the repeated warnings that we're going to have another terrorist attack in 5 days? They did that at least twice last fall. The second one was saying that the evil werewolf was going to blow up the malls on Halloween. Didn't happen. Last winter, ash crack comes out again. We're going to be attacked again. We've received reliable information, perhaps from Arthur Anderson, that we're going to be attacked again within 5 days. Didn't happen. This time they say, oh, you better watch out this holiday season, or there could be a whole new meaning to Saturday in the park getting bombed on the 4th of July. They claimed it again then. And to make sure everybody was cowering, hiding under their beds from the evil ones and not paying attention to the Patriotic Act sailing through Congress and all, 2001, an anthrax odyssey. Never did I think that all I would have to do for entertainment would be to go to the supermarket, look at all the bags of flour, and start laughing. And also in the fine tradition of 1984, Rumsfeld announced we were going to have a Ministry of Truth in the Pentagon, the Office of Strategic Influence, whose purpose would be to plant phony stories in the press and the media in other people's countries, even friendly countries, if we thought it would serve our interest in the short run to do so. And there was enough outcry on that Rumsfeld then announced, okay, we're not going to do it after all. Which story is true? Especially because almost immediately they did announce the opening of the Information Awareness Office in the Pentagon, whose purpose is almost identical to the Office of Strategic Influence, and guess who they hired to run it? How low is this? They hired John Poindexter, arch criminal of the Contragate scandal, right-hand man of Oliver North and all those assassinations and death squad butcher jobs and alleged drug running and all, crack epidemic in South Central that the San Jose Mercury News linked to the Contras and the CIA and all. We thought we'd bring him back again to help fight terrorism. And the Pentagon has even gone into business with Jerry Bruckheimer, the film producer who gave us Black Hawk Down and Top Gun and other classics of the silver screen like Coyote Ugly. He's been hired by the Pentagon to team with this guy named Bertram Van Munster, I kid you not, who supposedly is the brains behind that wonderful show Cops, designed to desensitize people to having their doors kicked down and random searches of cars by the police. Bruckheimer and Van Dun are now producing a so-called reality TV series of our soldiers fighting against the evil ones to be shown on primetime television. And Bruckheimer's come right out and said, we want it to be a recruiting tool for the military. And it's interesting, though, that all these war movies that have come out all of a sudden, these propaganda movies, Black Hawk Down, Pearl Harbor, Behind Enemy Lines, more, 3 new TV shows about the CIA all at once, all portraying them in a positive light, which is not an easy thing to do. Those movies and shows were first in production when Clinton was still president. And the Pentagon has also hired a PR firm called the Rendon Group to teach them how to spin the war on terrorism better, so we'll keep lapping it up and coming back for more. But some of these things that started on September 11th in the media reports still don't make sense to me. Did those guys really take over those planes with box cutters and plastic knives? If I was a professional airline pilot and some lunatics burst into my cabin with box cutters and plastic knives and told me to fly the plane into the World Trade Center and kill everybody, I'd at least consider beating the crap out of them first. And imagine how disappointed some of the spin-neisters were when, since we can't find Osama bin Laden, prepare for the big show trial of the great evil one, the traitor John Walker Lind. What if Lind went up on the stand and said, "Yo, I thought I was in an episode of Survivor and I'm the only one here. Where's my $1 million, man?" I went overseas 5 days after September 11th, and I couldn't believe the contrast in the mass media coverage of September 11th and what led up to it and terrorism in general and the war over there in contrast to what there was over here. I've joked for years that our media has become so dumbed down that it's not that much different from Pravda, the old Soviet Union daily newspaper that the communists put out that gave you 8 pages a day of all the government thought you should know. Well, we're there, folks. We get bombarded with more information, but bombarding people with too much information, most of it useless, is just as good a way of controlling a society as depriving them of information. Instead, what do we get? Oh my God, human cloning! What are we going to do about human cloning? For some reason, that doesn't worry me. I think we've had human cloning as long as we've been alive. It's called the U.S. public school system. But over there, I found out so many things, and when I came back here, I thought everybody else knew this stuff too, or had read about it or something. People are going, What? I never heard about that. That couldn't have happened, could it? Over there, even some of the mainstream straight daily papers like The Independent and especially The Guardian in Britain, which you can read on their website at www.guardian.co.uk, all kinds of interesting things in there, including not one but 2 reports that there was an informal diplomatic meeting in July of 2001, the summer before September 11th, in a Berlin hotel room. America was there, Soviet Union was there, Iran, Pakistan, Northern Alliance, Taliban invited but declined to attend. And according to The Guardian, the American diplomatic representatives said, "Hey, we're getting ready to invade Afghanistan and take out Osama bin Laden." And he didn't seem to care if the Pakistani representative took this back to the Taliban, which The Guardian claimed he did. Thought that was interesting. Other things that were common knowledge over there but not over here was that a chartered Saudi airliner was allowed to come into this country and pick up other members of the bin Laden family to get them safely back to Saudi Arabia right after September 11th. The FBI wasn't too amused about that. And how many of you know that the Bush family and the bin Laden family have a business relationship going back about 25 years? one of King George's first business partners when he was still a princeling. Back in 1979, in his first business venture, Arbusto Energy, was none other than Salem bin Laden, older brother of Osama by 1 year. And there's also this company called the Carlyle Group that King George Bush I still works for. And it's headed by Frank Carlucci, Contragate criminal, and one of the defense secretaries in the Reagan-Bush years. He's on there. Other people on the board of directors include James Baker, Bush I's Secretary of State and political dirty trick specialist who helped fix the Florida elections for Georgie Jr. later on. He's on board. Who else? Fidel Ramos, old president of the Philippines, is involved. John Major, who succeeded Margaret Thatcher as conservative prime minister of England, he's involved. And what the Carlyle Group does is they're the 11th largest defense contractor in the United States now. They don't really make anything. They buy up other companies, floundering manufacturers of weapons of mass destruction, put them on their feet financially, and either sell them off or hang on to them before they move on to another host. They're moving into other consumer technology and some media outlets overseas. Another person involved with Carlyle is King George Bush I, who to this day makes speeches on Carlyle's behalf for $800,000 in Carlyle stock per appearance. And guess who else made speeches for Carlyle before he got in the new Bush administration? Colin Powell. And guess who else had millions invested in Carlyle before they pulled it out in October? The bin Laden family. Going back to September 11th, another interesting one was all the different networks, they all had their news going all day, and I was flipping from channel to channel and surfing in between, and CBS seemed to be about the best in terms of what passes for quality these days with corporate news. CNN behind them, and then rock bottom was Fox News. Gee, what a surprise. Tell me, retarded punditoid number 6, how does this compare to the Monica Lewinsky scandal? Will this take America's attention off of Chandra Levy? They were thinking deep on this one. It was also interesting to watch the expert witness follies, where the networks, to outscoop each other quickly, gathered up all these people from past administrations, Republican for the most part. They got Kissinger on there. They got his proteges like Lawrence Eagleburger somehow ribbiting and croaking away in toad-like fashion, and other people on there. And it was interesting what came out of their mouths when they got shoved onto TV so quickly that they didn't get everything cleared with the spin doctors and official channels first. For example, James Woolsey, Clinton's first director of the CIA, they had him on TV looking like Yoda in a really bad mood. Yeah, well, the FBI and the grand jury had given us at the CIA the information they had on the 1993 World Trade Center bombing at the time. We could have spent all these years tracking these people down, taking care of them, so to speak, and this kind of thing might never have happened. In other words, all these different intelligence agencies we spent hundreds of billions of dollars on, I think we have 13 of them now, they fight with each other. They don't even get along. They don't even work together. They have prima donna hissy fits with each other instead. It's all run around the musical chairs with the Keystone Spies or something. All these documents they dredged up from the apartments of the people they went after for the 1993 bombings, talking about other ways to take out buildings with planes and everything, but nobody bothered to translate them because they couldn't find any Arabic translators. Finally, late in the day, King George II finally comes back on the TV to reassure us all is well, looking even more like a deer caught in the headlights than usual. I mean, have you noticed that no matter how they package him, he still gives off this vibe like he knows he doesn't belong where he is? My first exposure to him was when he gave his acceptance speech at the Republican convention in Philadelphia in summer of 2000, and there he was, looking like a rich college frat boy trying to get on the debate team, standing behind this podium that looked too big for him.
We're going to make America strong and America proud. I'll restore honesty and dignity to the White House.
And then he came right out and said on national television,
"Don't mess with Texas."
I hope that's not what this war is really about. But September 11th, we're hearing, where's George? Where's George? He's in Louisiana. No. We took him up to hide him in Nebraska from the big bad werewolf. And we were thinking, no. He's up in the Bush family palace in Kennebunkport, Maine.
Hey, Pop, you told me this job was going to be easy. What do I do now?
I can't believe some of the stuff that comes out of that guy's mouth, and he gets away with it. I mean, in the endless war that's supposed to go on and on like the ever-ready rabbit, look who we've put in charge. This is the guy who on the campaign trail called people from Greece Grecians, Kosovians, called Jimmy Carter a European-style socialist, and thought Friends was a movie and the Taliban were a rock band. Yeah, he was asked what his favorite book was that influenced him the most, and he refused to say. Finally, he realized people wouldn't take that for an answer, so he cited a children's book that he said influenced him a lot when he was a little kid. Turned out that book was published in '66 when he was already in college. Then he was asked how he thought things would go with Prime Minister Poutine in Canada. And he went on and on about what great friends they were. They'd known each other for years. They got along fabulously. The trouble is, that's not the name of the Prime Minister of Canada. It's Jean Chrétien. Poutine is a weird, creamy potato dish they serve in Eastern Canada, and Bush didn't know the difference. And he calls himself the education president, says he's going to fix our schools. And Laura, his wife, who has one hell of an evil pair of eyes, if you've ever looked at her carefully. She says that her do-good project for being first lady is going to be literacy and education, maybe because of what snores on the other side of the bed. I don't know.
Rarely is the question asked, is our children learning? I will have a foreign-handed foreign policy.
Here's what he knew about the Middle East.
It is clear our nation is reliant on big foreign oil. More and more of our imports come from overseas.
Oh, yes. I think this is an abortion quote. I'm not sure.
It is important for us to explain to our nation that life is important. It's not only life of babies, but life of children living in, the dark dungeons of the internet. Families is where our nation finds hope, where wings take dream.
Around the time that came out of his mouth, his spinmeisters realized people were starting to see that this guy was so dumb he made Dan Quayle look like Einstein. They're saying, no. You're picking on the disabled when you make fun of that. The guy's dyslexic. Give him a break. And I mean no harm against anybody dyslexic. There's at least 2 in my extended family, and they've been through hell because of it. But should we have somebody who may see things in mirror image or backwards have his finger on all the buttons of weapons of mass destruction?
Hey, Dick. Hey, Cornholio's rummy. Hey, come here. Look at all these buttons I found over here in the corner. Well, let's see what they do. Let's see what I push this one.
You just launched nuclear missiles at China, sir.
Oh, well, we have business over there, don't we? Now, let me see if I can bring them back. I'll push this button.
You just push the buttons so they can't be called back, sir.
Really? That's too bad. Let's go watch some baseball. Will the highways on the internet become more few? I know how hard it is for you to put food on your family.
I haven't had this much fun with creative mutilation of the English language. Not even since Japanese hardcore have I had this much fun. This goes all the way back to my sophomore year in high school, where I had this geometry teacher whose parents were from Norway, but he was from Minnesota. And he had the exact same accent as all the characters in the Fargo movie. And big baggy Charlie Chaplin pants and a flannel hunting shirt, often with a white shirt with a skinny tie underneath in the middle of the bell-bottom 70s, and a disproportionately small head with wavy widow's peak hair on top. Started out slow, seemed like just a boring math class initially, but then one day, now, we're talking about the angle CAB. Excuse me, B. Angle AD. Boy, am I having a time today. And then it grew and grew and grew. And luckily, me and a friend in an earlier class period had started writing down his quotes. And by the end of the year, the notebook was 1.5 inches thick. Things like, well, this is what happened one day to congruent triangles.
Now, we working with Klangagi Trubers.
No, 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 no. Congruent triangulars, congruent triangles, congruent, drop, grab, where was there? Excuse me, Oh, yes, triangulars, no, tringlers. Oh, no, triurglars. Oh, I can't even try. Failing grade became this one day.
We gabba bake. Our nabberness clonks, dap, cards. But all I got was a flailing grood.
Oh, flabby grab, me bonk winkerbean, failing grunt. Great group, grade. Lassie, bottomless Negro. And then the Freudian slips about food, sex, and Watergate began. Do fluorescent lights save energy? Well, it depends a lot on the boobs, or blubs, or bulbs that you use. Finally, one day, he comes out and asks the class, Oberdiampus blabby dwerp. Not one English word left in the entire sentence. Finally, in Oslo, about a year ago, I got to ask a group of people, okay, is this really Norwegian? No. Nor is asking the class, poofy snibble abby glob, Norwegian either. Wimpy hamburglers, yep. Scoozy pimple, need eat less ink breakfast. So flounder radius sphere, laxative, gorge porky nog, glurp, in min mob, no!
Bush. I'm going to expand child care even to those who don't have children. It's clearly a budget. It's got a lot of numbers in it.
This is our president, folks. He goes to Quebec City for the FTAA, that evil trade treaty meeting,
and he says, no, there's not going to be a press conference today. Not in English, not in French, not in Mexican.
After September 11th, he goes over to England and meets the child prodigy singing star Charlotte Church. And what does he say to her but,
so, what state is Wales in?
I said, it's a separate country next to England. And he went,
oh, okay.
I didn't know what to say.
What I am against is quotas. I am against hard quotas. Quotas, they basically delineate based upon whatever. However they delineate quotas, I think, vulcanize society. So I don't know how that fits into what everybody else is saying, their relative positions, but that's my position.
Somehow this guy got buttered and squirted through Yale. Maybe because he came from a good family with a nasty reputation. I don't know. Don't know how he made it through there, but they brought him back to Yale in 2001 to give the commencement address to the graduating class. And what advice does he have for them?
And to the C students, I say, you too can be President of the United States.
And both Bushes and Ashcroft have been calling for American intelligence to get back in bed with who they call unsavory characters. Bring back the good old days when there were no restrictions on us privatizing the work and contracting out the assassinations, the overthrows, the drug running to the mafia, the drug lords, our friends in the intelligence community. In a way, I suppose that doesn't surprise me because there's so many unsavory characters in the Bush administration. Anybody who knows their Countergate scandal trivia recognizes an awful lot of familiar faces in increasingly high positions. John Negroponte was ambassador to Honduras during the Contra War, where Reagan and his cowboys thought it'd be a real neat idea to overthrow the Sandinista government. 30,000 or more Nicaraguans died, most of them civilians. All kinds of drug running going on to finance it. Crack hit South Central, and the rest is ugly history. And Negroponte was widely believed to have been the coordinator of that war and all the assassinations and atrocities. Do we round him up as a terrorist and lock him in a cage in Guantanamo Bay? No. We've made him ambassador to the United Nations. And again, I wonder how many things would be going so wrong today if we could resist the unsavory characters and their unsavory desires in the first place. For example, Iran in 1953, the CIA thought it would be a dandy idea to overthrow the democratically elected government of Mohammad Mossadegh and install the Shah back into power, who was lividly hated by his own people. So much so that he had to constantly wage military war against Iranian citizens, couldn't give him enough guns, couldn't give him enough torture devices. Finally, the Iranian people overthrew the Shah anyway, but at a great cost. The Shah literally killed off all moderate, non-religious opposition to his rule, so the only people who were organized who were left was violent, fundamentalist Muslim fanatics led by Ayatollah Khomeini. And once Khomeini and the mullahs got into power in Iran, violent Islamic fundamentalist uprisings began to erupt all over that part of the world and beyond. I can't help but wonder how much of this we'd be dealing with today if we'd left the Iranian people alone in the 1950s and let them elect their own government. Other unsavory characters we couldn't resist getting into bed with were the Mujahideen guerrillas in Afghanistan, who, according to Zbigniew Brzezinski, Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, in an interview published in France last year, he bragged that we started training, organizing, and arming those Mujahideen guerrillas 6 months before the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. We did it as a scam to try and trick the Soviets into falling into a war, and we didn't care who we used to get it. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, regardless of whether they think we're all infidels and want to kill us too. And besides, their dope is pretty good. Another interesting article from the British Guardian from September 29th, 2001 had this to say about the Afghan-Soviet War. In 1979, after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the CIA and Pakistan's ISI, Inter-Services Intelligence Spy Agency, considered the best in the region, launched the largest covert operation in the history of the CIA. Their purpose was to harness the energy of the Afghan resistance to the Soviets and expand it into a holy war, an Islamic jihad, which would turn Muslim countries within the Soviet Union against the communist regime and eventually destabilize it. When it began, it was meant to be the Soviet Union's Vietnam. It turned out to be much more than that. Over the years, through the ISI, the CIA funded and recruited almost 100,000 radical mujahideen guerrillas from 40 Islamic countries as soldiers for America's proxy war. The rank and file of the mujahideen were unaware that their jihad was actually being fought on behalf of Uncle Sam. The irony is that America was equally unaware that it was financing a future war against itself. In 1989, after being bloodied by 10 years of relentless conflict, the Russians withdrew, leaving behind a civilization reduced to rubble. Civil war in Afghanistan raged on. The jihad spread to Chechnya, Kosovo, eventually to Kashmir, where it's still going on, and India and Pakistan are on the brink of having a nuclear war now over it. We offered to look the other way at Pakistan's nuke program if they'd let us use their country to go fight people in Afghanistan, by the way. The CIA continued to pour in money and military equipment, but the overheads had become immense and more money was needed. The Mujahideen ordered farmers to plant opium as a revolutionary tax, quote unquote. The ISI set up hundreds of heroin laboratories across Afghanistan. Within 2 years of the CIA's arrival, the Pakistan-Afghanistan borderland had become the largest producer of heroin in the world, and the single biggest source of the heroin on American streets that were helping kill my friends. The annual profits, said to be between $100 and $200 billion, were plowed back into training and arming militants, including a young hothead with a real big trust fund by the name of Osama bin Laden. And after the Soviet Union was driven out of Afghanistan, did we finish the job? Did we go in there and so much as thank the Afghan people for allowing us to use their country as a killing field and all? Oh no, you made great corpses and cannon fodder, but see you later. Didn't rebuild the roads, didn't rebuild the cities, didn't even disarm all those different mujahideen guerrilla groups who then took all the guns we gave them and fired on each other, kind of like they are today. They degenerated into rival warlords that were killing so many people, it made the Taliban look pretty good. When two different factions of the Northern Alliance I would use the term loosely to describe them, were both fighting over control of Kabul, the capital, third of the city destroyed, 50,000 people dead. In that part of the world, our abandonment of the Afghan people is called the Great Betrayal. So if we think they're suddenly going to turn around and trust us in the Middle East and embrace Yankee-style democracy and Baywatch and McDonald's all of a sudden, we might want to think again. The United Nations Drug Control Policy Center reported in October, right after September 11th, that half the heroin still coming from Afghanistan, which is a lot, was coming from the 10% of the country then controlled by the Northern Alliance. And now that we've given most of the rest of the country back to them, poppies are springing up all over again. And even when the Taliban were running things and slaughtering their own people in a way only Pol Pot could love, we gave them $140 million a year in foreign aid and another $43 million bonus in the spring of 2001 as their reward for fighting drugs. Is this any way to win a war on terrorism? There's no way we will ever win a war on terrorism. And even if we did, what is victory? Israel's been fighting a war on terrorism since the minute of their birth. Have they won yet? Has the British government won their war on terrorism in Northern Ireland? I don't think so. If bombing civilians stops terrorism, why hasn't it stopped? Bush says,
the only way to pursue peace is to pursue those who threaten it.
What? What about negotiation? Too many syllables for King George? What about going over there and sitting down with all the different parties involved and try and get to the root of the problems? One government agency warned Bush when he first came into power, gave a report to the new president saying that thanks to further economic globalization, which they call free trade over here, regions, countries, and groups feeling left behind will face deepening economic stagnation, political instability, and cultural alienation. They will foster political, ethnic, ideological, and religious extremism, along with the violence that often accompanies it. Who gave that to the president? The CIA. He still didn't listen. Instead, we're fed these contradictory reports from September 11 onwards. One day, we've already invaded. The special forces are in. The British SAS is in. We're already kicking ass all over those Afghani people. Next day, no, we haven't invaded yet. Next day, we say we have. Next day, Tony Blair comes out, we will not invade unless we are properly prepared. And finally tell the American people chomping at the bit and waving their flags wanting to kill somebody, well, we haven't invaded quite yet because we need more intelligence. For once, I agreed with the Bush administration. So now we get these contradictory reports again. We've got the evil one quartered in a cave. Guess he's not there. We got him this time. Guess he's not there. We float these trial balloons. Hey, they might regroup in Somalia. Why don't we invade Somalia? It worked so well the last time. That didn't fly. We're going to go, how about Yemen? We've got advisors there now. Maybe we should conquer Sudan. Maybe everything will be all better if we kill Saddam Hussein. What this says to me is not that we're putting out all these contradictory messages to confuse an enemy in a part of the world where 75% of the people can't read. We have no idea what to do over there to keep the war on terrorism scam humming along and filling up the bank accounts. Overthrow the Taliban. Then what? The frightening thing is, bin Laden speaks for a lot more people. Millions more people. Why are their feelings against our very existence so intense? We aren't being bombed and threatened by African terrorists, even though we've treated that part of the world even worse than the Middle East. Not from South American terrorists, not even vengeful Vietnamese terrorists. Why this part of the world is it so intense that people are willing to blow themselves up just so they can blow a few of us up? They got nothing to lose in some cases. We need to not just study bin Laden, but feel bin Laden. I saw an interview with him about 3 years ago, like a fool I didn't save. But what struck me about it was he didn't come across as some frothing maniac out to destroy God, Mom, and apple pie. As scary and repulsive as most of his views were, the way he went point by point on what made him become what he is today, starting with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. He joined the jihad. Where would Osama be today if we'd never goaded the Soviet Union into invading Afghanistan? And he said he was further hardened by the Saudi royal family sending the army in to fire on and kill protesters in Mecca during the pilgrimage, a little before that. But then what really set him off was, of course, our big victory that was going to end all these problems, Gulf War #1, where he was taking out his rage on the Saudi royal family once again for, as he put it, desecrating Holy Land, which he defines as the entire territory of Saudi Arabia, by allowing the infidel American troops to use their soil, use the air base, the big Prince Sultan surveillance base they have there, etc., to stage bombing raids and kill hundreds of thousands of fellow Muslims. That was what made him aim his sights on us and beyond. Also, one of his main goals at that point was overthrowing the House of Saud, the Saudi royal family, where he said that most of the people who were the monarchs in those countries weren't even native to that part of the world. They were plucked and installed by the British after World War I when they carved up what was left of the Ottoman Empire and redrew the borders almost at random in some places, creating a country called Jordan, which had never been a country like that before. Suddenly they have their own king. Created Iraq out of thin air, out of 3 different nations. Little research into this proved bin Laden was exaggerating a little bit. The House of Saud goes back hundreds of years, Kuwaiti royal family, at least a couple hundred, but he was right in that those people were cemented onto the thrones by the British to make sure there would be pliant puppets to ensure a nice oil supply for us, the rest of the people who actually lived there, be damned. But over the years, how do you think the people there feel about their royal families? We're playing with fire over there. Saudi Arabia, most people, their income gone down 2/3 in the last few years, while the 5,000 people that make up the Saudi royal family making off with all the oil money. A few people would like to get rid of them. Same with Egypt, same with the rest. Pakistan. How do you think the dictator of that country must feel right now? Pervez Musharraf, he's got guns on both sides of his head. One on one side says,
"You're either with us or with the terrorists. Don't mess with Texas."
And the gun on the other side of his head are his own people, who are estimated by the European media to be 15% pro-Taliban, not just the Afghan Taliban, but a movement just like them in Pakistan that wants to run that country that way, that's also estimated to include the sympathies of 30% of the armed forces, including many top generals and the recently fired head of the ISI intelligence agency, who must have some very, very interesting friends. And Musharraf has admitted he can't control his own army, and the people who are going and shooting people in the part of Kashmir that India claims is theirs, India says, you control them or we're going to nuke you. What happens if these same generals who got rid of somebody else only 3 years ago to put Musharraf in power decide they can just as easily knock off him? Then do we have to aim our war on terrorism against a country of 140 million people who has the atomic bomb? What else borders Afghanistan? Iran, well, we tried to enlist them in the war on terrorism. They laughed us out of town. Gee, I wonder why. Then up above are these former Soviet republics like Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and above there, Kazakhstan, supposedly sitting on more oil than Saudi Arabia is. Those places have barely figured out how to be countries at all, and they're all in the hands of corrupt dictators who are being opposed by armed, violent Islamic fundamentalists. If this sounds familiar, how much more of a fire are we going to light in those places if we invade Iraq? What's going to happen to our wonderful friends in Saudi Arabia or even in Egypt? One columnist in one of the British papers predicted that in the next 5 years, the opposition was already so intense that the governments of Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the Palestinian Authority were all going to fall to Islamic fanatics. I hope he's wrong, but that's the kind of fire we're playing with over there. And the rest of the people we trained in that jihad went back to their old countries and brought their new fighting skills and fanatic religious fervor with them. And so now what do you have? Violent Islamic uprisings stretching from Algeria, where it's been going on for years, and 100,000 people have died since the military moved to prevent a democratically elected Islamic fundamentalist government from taking power. Yes, people voted them in. All the way from Algeria to Egypt to Saudi Arabia to Pakistan to 2 different flashpoints in Indonesia now, another in the Philippines where we've already sent in troops who couldn't even rescue one American hostage right and killed one of the 2 of them. That's the amount of fire we are playing with over there. We go into Iraq, you think Ariel Sharon's going to wait 10 seconds before he tries to drive every Palestinian out of the West Bank, which some documents show he's already expressed the desire to do that. thus handing Osama bin Laden exactly what he wants: a world war between Islam and the West. And so far, he didn't get his billion new warriors for the jihad as soon as we bombed Afghanistan, but we go into Iraq, that's going to be another story, and there's no way the other side is going to win, but a hell of a lot of innocent people are going to die on both sides and come home in body bags. And I repeat, what will those people's children be like? We're going to be dealing with bombings and hate on a scale we can't imagine today for years and years and years to come. Then what? Then what do we do? I find myself agreeing with Michael Medved, of all people, that right-wing punditoid, when he wrote in the USA Today, the American people must pursue prevention and protection, not punishment. Prevention and protection. Maybe starting with not just ending our dependence on foreign oil, but as much as humanly possible, ending our dependence on oil altogether. Why SUVs are a greater threat to national security than Osama bin Laden. It's not just that they put out 1/3 more pollution than the average car and eat up that much more gas, making us that much more dependent on foreign oil and thus dependent on keeping all the people in those foreign lands oppressed just so we can run off with their oil to power our yuppie swine mobiles. But those things pollute so much that what good is it going to do if you build a whole wall around all of us to protect us from terrorism if there's so many holes poked in our Swiss cheese of the sky, we can't go outside anymore. Bush continues to fiddle while the world burns when it comes to global warming, but in the meantime, we can't. We still have to live here. There isn't going to be a rapture to take all of us to the great golf course in the sky with the rest of those people. Why spend so many hundreds of billions of dollars on Star Wars when you could be spending that money on safer airports and safer airplanes? Finally, a couple days after September 11th, I got a flight out of Memphis, Tennessee. The line to get through the security was 2.5 hours long. And you had people who looked like they were barely old enough to shave, going through every single piece of checked luggage, every carry-on bag, unfolding all the clothes, looking everywhere. But if you think standing in that line is monotonous, imagine having to do that job all day. In San Francisco, the people who run the metal detectors and look at our carry-on bags for weapons are the lowest paid people in the whole airport. We put it all in the hands of private corporations who are more interested in how much money they can squeeze out of the airline security industry than they are in protecting passengers from terrorist attacks. That's how seriously we really take airport security. So a bill goes through Congress to make it like it is in many European countries, a well-trained federal law enforcement agency that is paid well enough and trained well enough they know what to look for without delaying everybody else. Guess who tried to block that from going through? Bush and the House Republicans, because it would interfere with private company profits in airport security. And we could take a few lessons from El Al Airlines in Israel as well, to put all the checked-in luggage through what I guess it's a decompression chamber to simulate high altitude, so if there's an altitude-triggered bomb, it goes off on the ground in an area where nobody gets hurt. They have a plainclothes sky marshal on every flight, trained in breaking up hijackings, a far smarter solution than giving guns to pilots, I might add. Which many pilots don't want, I might add. I mean, they're talking about arming flight attendants, too. I mean, what if they mix up some of those foil bags? Would you like a snack? And it explodes on you. Some people said, oh, Jello, that's not punk rock. You're talking about cops and talking about making more rules. I'd rather have a cop on a flight than wind up dead, thank you very much. And on top of that, El Al protects their pilots through not one but two bulletproof doors. And they've even reinforced the floors of the cabins of the plane, so if some clown comes in and tries to pull another episode of The Last Temptation of Reed and light his shoe on fire and blow the thing up, even an explosion may not down the aircraft. It all depends on what we're willing to pay for. On September 11th, the USA Today had, for that edition, their special pull-out travel section. And in it was a full-page ad from the Hitachi Corporation of Japan bragging about all the semiconductors they'd made that power those Japanese bullet trains. And I thought, well, I'm not that interested in semiconductors. I don't even have a computer. But I sure do like those trains. Imagine if we spent the Star Wars money on a national or international high-speed train system. San Francisco to Los Angeles in an hour. San Francisco to Mexico City in 2 or 3 hours. Same for New York. And you'd get to look at scenery on the way, too, and walk around in the train. And granted, the scenery would fly by at warp speed, but I'm sure you've seen enough MTV commercials at warp speed that you're used to looking at stuff like that with your attention span, right? And yes, you can hijack a train, but you can't fly it into buildings and kill thousands of people. Besides, trains are cool. And Ashcrack and Bushcroft are beating the drums for more security at our nuclear power plants, saying that's where the evil ones and Osama bin Werewolf may strike next. That won't be a problem if we shut them down. And as frightening and as insane as Osama bin Laden is, 2 of his 3 key demands are actually reasonable. Number 1, pull the U.S. troops out of Saudi Arabia. Most of the hijackers on those planes were Saudis. If it means that much to people there and they'll stop killing us, I think that's the small price to pay. Same with demand number 2. For crying out loud, isn't it time to end the sanctions against Iraq? Look how well they've worked. Saddam Hussein is still sitting pretty, still the evil one, while the estimated death toll of the Iraqi people since the Gulf War and the sanctions, conservative estimates 300,000, not so conservative between 1 and 2 million people. That's genocide. And we wonder why people in that part of the world hate our goddamn guts so much. Maybe that's a good place to start. Not just lift the sanctions, but go in there with some goodwill and feed the people. Bin Laden's 3rd key demand is a lot less reasonable: total destruction of the state of Israel. But we sure as hell could be doing a lot more to get Ariel Sharon and his thugs to rejoin the civilized world. Would he really keep going crazy in the occupied territories if we and our allies cut off all military aid and recalled the ambassadors? He'd wise up in 10 minutes. On top of that, according to Professor Henry Thompson of Auburn University, all Israel would have to do to make up for all the military aid we give them would be to raise the income tax on their own people 5% a year. On top of that, we could be going to all those countries in the former Soviet Union and Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the rest, and instead of spending money on Star Wars, go in there where people are starving, but they're sitting on so many leftover Cold War weapons that sooner or later they're going to sell them to any old terrorist group just so they can get something to eat. Why don't we go over there and buy the weapons now and destroy them on sight so nobody gets to use them after that? Instead, we have a situation where in places like the little town of Dara Adam Kel near Peshawar, the Pakistani city right near the Afghan border, it's an open-air flea market for all the weapons we've dumped there. It's like instead of going to the flea market to look for weird records or old furniture or clothes or something or some tools, ooh, Kalashnikovs? Oh, he's got them over here. I'll take 50 of those. M16s, great. Surface-to-air missile launchers and the missiles, too. We gave 200 of them to the Mujahideen. The Taliban didn't keep them all. You can just buy them here. Grenades, cheaper than sugar. Why not? Why don't we go over there and buy that stuff up? And for that matter, isn't it time to get serious about disarming the whole world? Instead of being caught in this endless horse race of America versus Britain versus France versus Russia versus China, and yes, Israel, to see who can sell the most weapons to the most dictators and to the people opposing the dictators and the other heads of state, and when they start using them on each other, sell them some more. Look what we've done to Africa. Look what we've done to Africa. And on top of that, this time, we do have to finish the job. Bush and Rumsfeld are already saying we have no responsibility to rebuild Afghanistan. We're just going to throw them to the wolves and let the Northern Alliance kill each other again and again and again and expect it not to blow back and kill us in the end again and again and again through bombings or through heroin or whatever. Dropping 30,000 yellow plastic bags of food for one day that the local taste palates aren't even familiar with does not ease starvation in a country where the UN says as many as 7 million people are on the brink of starvation and all. We have to do more than that. Rebuild the roads, put the schools back in place. As Ralph Nader put it, we burned down the haystack and couldn't even find the needle. There's other ways of looking at this through history, too. World War I, what did we do for the German people after we clobbered the Kaiser? Nothing. Just left them there, rubbed them in their ruins of their country and rubbed their noses in their own misery to the point where things got so bad for a while it took a wheelbarrow full of money to buy a loaf of bread. And people got so desperate and so bitter and so angry, they all but democratically elected Hitler to power. Then what happened? Well, we finally get rid of him, and at least we're a little smarter this time. This time we had the Marshall Plan to rebuild Germany and get Western Europe up and running again and stay in Japan a while, put it back together, install at least some semblance of a democracy. So why no Marshall Plan for the former Soviet Union? Instead, we've abandoned them too, and Russia itself is by and large run by gangsters where most people are starving. Surely we can do better than this. Right now, we spend 0.01% of our gross domestic product on foreign aid. Yet CNN took a poll, and over half the people polled said we spend too much on foreign aid. This has to change. As Michael Moore put it, will we ever get to the point that we realize we will be more secure when the rest of the world isn't living in poverty so we can have nice running shoes? Instead, starting just about September 12th, we get all this hype saying, fight back, show they can't keep America down, fight terrorism, go shopping. But isn't it our appetite for shopping, for cheap bargain stuff that other people had to work like slaves to make so it would be cheap enough for us to go get at Walmart or whatever? Isn't that contributing to how much people hate us in other parts of the world? And on top of that, a lot of the people who poured into Afghanistan to join the jihad came from Pakistani schools called madrasas, religious schools created and financed by our friends, the Saudi royal family, whose own interpretation of Islam is along the Wahhabi lines and is almost as severe as the Taliban themselves, especially towards women. But hey, they have oil. We like them. Here they are building up these religious schools that take in people who don't have any money for another school, maybe don't have a home or a place to eat, take them in as children. They'll feed them, they'll shelter them, and instead of teaching them what we think of as an education, they study the Quran over and over and over again through the eyes of narrow-minded, fundamentalist religious clerics. So when they graduate from madrasas, they can hardly wait to go join the jihad and blow up some Americans and die and go indulge in the black-eyed virgins or whatever they teach them at the madrasas. Why are the madrasas so popular? They've multiplied in Pakistan faster than Starbucks does over here. Because the Pakistani government hardly spends any money on its own school system anymore. They've cut it and cut it and cut it to the point where most of the schools are closed. The ones that are still there, the windows are gone, desks, books, etc. are very hard to come by. Reason being, the Pakistani government cut education to put the money into their nuclear program and to pay off all the debts they have to the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Yes, there is a link between World Bank and IMF to international terrorism by helping create those situations in the first place. Fighting against the World Bank, the IMF, the WTO, the Free Trade Agreement of the Americas, and corporate dictatorship and privatization in general, that's not terrorism, it's fighting terrorism. Because those corporations, not only do they treat those people so bad, they are terrorizing them. When those people get mad enough to fight back, they don't take it out on the corporations, they take it out on us. Backbreaking poverty is a prime recruiting ground for radical movements for change, and violent, strong-armed put-downs of movements for change creates the desperation and rage that creates terrorists. I agree we should defend ourselves. This is an enemy that ain't going to sit down and negotiate. They want us dead. Period. But again, defense, not offense, and defense means continuing to keep our eyes on the prize and not losing sight of all the other important things in the world that actually link into this. We can't let the fight against globalization become a casualty to the war on terrorism, at a time when the U.S. Conference of Mayors just released a report saying last year homeless people seeking shelter went up 13% in 1 year. In the fight to save our environment and clean it up, the fight to stop the death penalty at a time when people are finally waking up to how bad it is against the drug war and everything else, that shouldn't fall by the wayside. Right now, we're being told we have to accept a situation where everything is for sale. We are for sale. Our privacy is for sale. Our childhood is for sale. Even our genes are for sale. And somebody else can own them now. No, they can't. Don't believe the hype. We are patriotic citizens too, because we care about the long-term effects of what we do and not just short-term ass-kicking to soothe our inner child. Patriotism is defined as love of country, caring about its people, caring about the environment and how we affect other people and their ecosystems. Patriotism does not mean giving blind loyalty and a blank check to George W. Bush. Therefore, it is our patriotic duty to guard this country against people hiding behind the flag and hiding behind War on Terrorism Incorporated and God Bless America Uber Alles, using the war on terrorism to terrorize us. Bullying the first neighbor who takes down their flag, that's not very patriotic. Brandon Cruz fronting the fake dead Kennedys, who, according to an eyewitness report in Norfolk, Virginia, claimed that I was a terrorist and compared me to Osama bin Laden, claiming I didn't love my country because I was opposing the Bush regime. And then D.H. Peligro supposedly dedicated Holiday in Cambodia to our troops in Afghanistan, saying he supported the war. That's not patriotic. Censoring and silencing Bill Maher and talk show hosts like Peter Werby and trying to get people fired from universities just for saying something like, maybe we should understand people over there. That's not patriotic. Giving more and more power to spy agencies and police already proven to be totally incompetent. That's not patriotic. The TIPS program, trying to create a united Stasi of America. Each of us rat on everybody else. Maybe even get a reward or forgiveness of our credit card debts or free trip to Disney World or something. That's not patriotic. These legislators in Florida, Pennsylvania, South Carolina saying to fight terrorism, we have to force every school kid to pray to a fundamentalist Christian God in school every day. That's not patriotic. Nor is the Army of God, who didn't make Ashcroft's current toilet paper roll long list of terrorist organizations, even though they sent over 200 envelopes of white powder to abortion clinics and family planning centers. I don't think they're very patriotic either. And I, for one, refuse to be bullied by all these people saying that because of September 11th, we can't laugh when something is funny anymore. Eminem dressed as Osama bin Laden. That is funny. Dick Cheney's security detail leaving the plans in written form on how they were going to protect him at the Salt Lake City Olympics on the counter of a snowboard store. That is funnier still. John Ashcraft, in a PBS documentary slanted way far to the right, they said that Ashcroft was all ready to unleash a huge blitz against the adult video industry and online porn and all. If he really gets that obsessed with imposing Christian Taliban stuff in all our bedrooms, how about a million nude march on Washington? 1 million people rolling around on the Capitol Mall doing all those things Ashcraft says he doesn't like. Another 10,000 on his front lawn doing the same. That, my friends, would amuse me. You know the hip-hop group from Oakland called The Coup? They had a little mishap on September 11th, didn't they? Had to stop the press and have a new cover put into their new album because the old cover showed the Twin Towers blowing up on the front. Oops. Scott Ian of the metal band Anthrax moans and groans that he felt so bad about terrorism and the Anthrax scare that he was thinking of changing the band's name to Basket Full of Puppies. Saying like, I feel like it's 1937 and my name is Freddie Hitler or something. Jerry Falwell, always good for a laugh, assumed the high comic throne when he claimed that the Teletubbies was pushing the homosexual agenda because Tinky Winky carried a purse. Remember that one? Well, both he and Pat Robertson agreed with Osama bin Laden on September 11th, saying the towers went down because God is mad at America. Bush and the pretzel. Try not to laugh. Try real hard. And then think, why would they even admit that happened? Here was our supposedly strong, rootin' tootin' cowboy president, and he chokes on a pretzel. The only reason they're going to admit that in public, maybe, is because something a lot worse gave him that scar on his cheek. Was it a fight with the missus? Was it blacking out because he was indulging in one of those substances he says he doesn't indulge in anymore? Also, the reports that several of these hijackers were seen days before the hijackings getting drunk in titty bars. That doesn't sound very Islamic to me. But so far, the Excellence in Comedy Award for the War on Terrorism has to go to your friend and mine, the Clear Channel Corporation. who, thanks to deregulation laws and the Telecommunications Act of 1996, rammed through once again by the Clinton-Gore regime with help from Newt Gingrich, deregulated the laws about ownership of the airwaves, which are technically belong to the public, so that now, instead of being only able to own one radio station, one TV station per city, you can own as many as you want to. So Clear Channel now owns 1,200 stations, 10% of the total, and they pipe in the same dreck and horrible music and dumbed down, almost non-existent right-wing slanted news reports. And people wonder why we want pirate radio and we want internet radio. We want underground music and underground performances, so you don't have a situation where Clear Channel owns the radio station and Clear Channel owns the venue and owns the promotion company, and only Clear Channel events can be advertised on Clear Channel radio stations. Wrong. But they still have the comic relief ward because somebody with way too much time on their hands took it upon themselves to make a list and send it out to all these Clear Channel stations, listing all the songs they felt shouldn't be played on the air anymore because they might make people think of terrorism and the tragedies of September 11th. So now, at least on Clear Channel, listeners are free from being terrorized by Obla Dee Obla Da by the Beatles, On Broadway by the Drifters, Johnny Angel by Shelley Fabre, maybe the worst song I've ever heard in my life, even worse than Sheryl Crow. So maybe Clear Channel's doing us a favor here. I mean, after all, 3 Elton John songs had to go, too. Now you can listen to Clear Channel and not be terrorized by Benny and the Jets, Daniel, or Rocket Man. I mean, that's doing me a favor. I heard one Elton John song once, and I never, ever wanted to be terrorized by him again. Also on the Clear Channel list, you won't be terrorized by What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong. Or, come on, people now, smile on your brother, everybody get together, try and love one another right now. Banned! Like a bridge over troubled water, I will lay me down. Not anymore! Banned, banned. Might make people think of terrorism if you do that. Cat Stevens gets nailed, too, for terroristic images like Peace Train. And Morning Has Broken. Rock the Casbah is banned. All Rage Against the Machine is banned. Imagine by John Lennon is banned. New York, New York by Frank Sinatra is banned. And Not a Moment Too Soon for some of us, I might add. He ain't heavy, he's my brother. Gone. Banned. Terroristic. Wouldn't it be far better for our homeland if we put that kind of thought and energy into shortening the war on terrorism and pulling the plug before we invade Iraq and make the stupidest foreign policy mistake of our entire lifetimes in the process, burning every bridge we have over there and planting the seeds for that many more Osama bin Ladens and suicide bombers and all? I know right now there's a lot of bullying going on, but look how many people showed up at the first organized anti-war protest in San Francisco. We're almost at anti-Gulf War numbers already. That's a good sign. It kind of feels, though, like those voices in the wilderness in 1964 after the Gulf of Tonkin resolution went through Congress at a time when people really were scared of communism because we'd just gone through the Cuban Missile Crisis, saying, wait a minute, the Vietnam War is wrong, it should stop, we should get out of there now. Their reward was to be beaten, fired, called communists, traitors, peaceniks, pinkos, faggots. But in the long run, against incredible odds, the whole military-industrial complex and the hierarchies of both the Democratic and Republican parties aiming at the American people with both barrels, if that sounds familiar. The American people rose up and stopped the Vietnam War. We've done it once, we can do it again. One veteran of the anti-war movement I know said in his estimation, there were only 3,000 to 5,000 full-time shock troops and organizers fighting against the Vietnam War. It wasn't a 51% majority of a country of 220 million people, but it got the job done. We can do it again. We did it a lot quicker in the first Gulf War, too, didn't we? That one didn't even last a month before King George I pulled the plug on Gulf War #1 and stopped the troops at the Iraqi-Kuwaiti border, wouldn't let them go any further, even though General Schwarzkopf and Cheney and the rest of them were just chomping at the bit to go into Iraq and do a General Sherman job on Basra and destroy Baghdad and hopefully kill enough people that Saddam Hussein just might be one of them. But we didn't go that far. Why? Because the opposition got so intense and so fierce and so big so fast. Not just in San Francisco, but in small-town America, small-town Canada, Britain, France, Germany, Western Europe, you name it. There were protests in the streets, even in dictatorships like Syria, Algeria, Egypt, even though the corporate media hype was saying 90% of Americans love the Gulf War and love King George I. They knew it wasn't true, and they damn well better shut it down before things get any worse. Plus, Bush I had promised other people who'd entered into that alliance with him, not just the Arabian oil sheiks, but Britain and France and Germany and the rest, that we wouldn't go past the Kuwaiti-Iraqi border. The purpose was not to overthrow Saddam Hussein. It was to get Iraqi troops out of Kuwait. And they held him to that promise. I'm sure John Major in Britain wouldn't have cared at all, although Saddam Hussein had a great quote right around the time of the Gulf War, accusing Margaret Thatcher of vomiting poison like a spotted serpent. I don't know whether he really said that or not, but it's the best description of Thatcher I've ever heard. But even if John Major or Helmut Kohl in Germany, they wouldn't have cared if Bush broke his promise and went in and went nuts in Iraq, but they knew that their people did care. Their people held their leaders to holding Bush from doing any more damage than he already did. So if you know people overseas, email them, write them, talk to them, however you like to communicate. Let them know how important it is they keep the pressure on their leaders not to fall in with King George II in a disaster into Iraq. Even Tony Blair, who's Bush's big cheerleader for the war on terrorism so far, he seems to think he's Winston Churchill while King George thinks he's John Wayne. Urge people in other countries to save America from America and thus save the rest of the world as well. They already know who we are, TIPS program or not, so don't get quiet, get louder and louder and louder. That is our commander-in-chief in the scariest tightrope walk since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And on September 11th, we couldn't help thinking, wow, wouldn't it be wild if Ralph Nader, the Green Party, won and he was president and the Greens had to figure out what to do about this? And I caught myself thinking, well, at least there's somebody in there with some experience and know-how. And then I had to think, no, don't believe the hype. Stop. Look what they've done with their experience and know-how. They made a mess. Having people who think outside the box might not be such a bad idea in this case. I know we're all supposed to salute and march along because he's our president in a time of war, But I have no confidence whatsoever in Bush or his people to show any long-term wisdom or do the right thing in this situation. I can't help but have this image of him that's even kept me awake at night, of him running around loose in the war room or on the grounds of Camp David with his t-shirt pulled up over his head like Beavis in the cartoon. I am the great Cornholio! I am the great Cornholio! Powell or Cheney picks him up by the collar. Sit down, George. We have wars to plan. We have people to kill. We have countries to annihilate.
Then can I watch some baseball? Maybe have some pretzels?
I mean, Bush is more like the national mascot than a president in a way. He's kind of like Reagan. He just reads his cue cards, and that's about all he does. We would have more luck if we sent Richard Simmons to the Middle East to try and make things right than this guy. Even his father gave him a no-confidence vote on national television right after the tragedies of September 11th. Is your son prepared for the task ahead? And Bush smiled that clenched teeth reptilian grin of his and,
well, I don't know if anybody's ever prepared for something like this, but he has a great team around him.
He has a great team around him. And it's the team that worries me. Dick the Dick Cheney, vice president, and probably the guy who's really running the country for all practical purposes, like Bush, a gentleman draft dodger who weaseled out of the Vietnam War. Well, when Cheney was Secretary of Defense during Bush's father's Middle Eastern War, he ordered then General Colin Powell to draw up plans to nuke Baghdad. Powell himself, as a young officer in Vietnam, helped cover up the My Lai massacre, one of the most notorious atrocities committed by American troops. National Security Advisor is Condoleezza Rice, who does seem smart as a whip when it comes to intricate theories of jousting with the old former Soviet evil empire, but needs to be reminded it doesn't exist anymore. Cheney, by the way, stained with oil from head to toe. He was president of Halliburton Oil and Construction, who were in the process of negotiating with our enemies, the Taliban, to build an oil pipeline through Afghanistan, feasibility study financed by Enron. As defense secretary, back then, Cheney changed the rules so that private companies could enter the picture during wartime, and a company called Kellogg, Brown and Root could start privatizing, building military bases, running the mess halls and the laundries and other things in places like Afghanistan and the other new military bases we've set up in the other countries around then. And Kellogg, Brown and Root are owned by Halliburton. And the Pentagon has admitted that if they'd done these jobs themselves, it would cost the American taxpayers billions of dollars less than what we're doing now. And Attorney General John Ashcroft is a hardcore fundamentalist, Bible-thumping Christian and not so closeted white supremacist who is such an asshole that voters in the state of Missouri elected a dead guy to the Senate in the 2000 election just to get rid of John Ashcroft. He has written his own patriotic anthem, which he sang on CNN, Let the Eagle Soar. Let the ego soar, because he now is reportedly demanding people sing it at work now, too. Said to be superstitious about the devilishness of calico cats, and is at least as obsessed with covering up women's bodies as the Taliban. So obsessed, in fact, that he spent $8,000 of taxpayers' money installing a giant blue velvet curtain to cover up a statue at Justice Department headquarters that had one bare metal breast. That way everybody had to focus on the boob at the microphone during the press conferences, I guess. And he has prayer meetings in his office before each day of work, and everything is done not according to the Constitution, but according to the Bible. And I fear this is maybe what Bush meant by faith-based initiatives. Remember that little buzzword where he said we were going to cut poor people's welfare budget even more than it's already been cut because churches will automatically help them out instead, which I think is a pretty dangerous concept if you're giving government money to the church too, or if somebody's homeless and cold and freezing and starving and knocks on the door of the shelter and the only way they can get any of that nice hot soup over there, that bed over there, is to pray to these people's God. That's a little smelly to me. And what if this whole goddamn war is a faith-based initiative? One of the most dangerous parts of it to me is not only do we have violent Islamic fundamentalist fanatics on one side, we have violent fundamentalist Christian fanatics representing what they say is our side. And what if some of these goofs get it in their heads that Jesus isn't going to come back till we have Armageddon and the rapture and Sharon's doing his part? We better get started on all this. Come on, George, push the button. In heaven, you can be commissioner of baseball forever and ever and ever. The spirit of Seattle ain't dead, it's just changing a flat tire, and it's very much alive in other parts of the world. Italy just had their first general strike in many, many, many years. Wouldn't you love to see a general strike here? That might teach Enron a lesson. Nigeria, oil company platforms belonging to Chevron and Shell and people like that are being seized non-violently by groups of Nigerian women. Quebec City, spring of 2001, where they had the Free Trade Agreement of the Americas meeting with all the heads of state except Castro there, 70,000 protesters. That's 20,000 more than Seattle. Blacked out of the news down here, but there it was a very, very powerful event. And to my eyes, 95% of the signs the marchers were carrying were in French. And French is the sole official language only in one province in Canada, Quebec. And if that many people in one area are that pissed off about phony free trade, which is really a corporate coup going on, I see a lot of hope in that, in a way. Quebec City kind of surrounds a plateau, and the old part of town and the big hotels are on the plateau. They even admitted that fake free trade isn't even capitalism anymore, it's feudalism. New feudalism. They put up a moat this time. They put up a moat of these giant cement barriers with chain link fence on top. I do have to admire the courage of the people in the black masks that particular day, unlike the undercover cops in black masks beating the protesters later on in Geneva in Italy. Watch out for that one in the future. If you're with the FBI or with tips, you don't even have to disguise yourself as a radical freak anymore. Just put a mask on. This isn't good. But anyway, the people in the masks there, they were the first ones who took on the cops, broke through the barrier finally, and the Canadian cops, with some American military help we wouldn't admit to, instead of beating the crap out of everybody with clubs the way they did in Seattle, they went way overboard with gas, not paying attention to the wind. And the wind blew the gas into the hotels, trapping Bush and his entourage, among others, in their rooms from 5 p.m. until the next day. So that's another moral of the story. Not only come prepared at these protests if the cops are going to go crazy, bring your own helmet, bring your own shield, bring your own mask, but watch the weather and think military strategy. Stage a preemptive strike, the cops throw the gas gets blown on to the evil ones, the corporate evil ones. And then last April, Porto Alegre, Brazil, they have another globalization meeting. 50,000 protesters show up. So around the world, it is very much alive. As Noam Chomsky points out, we are not a free country in a relative sense because of the good hearts of wealthy people and corporations who gave them to us. We have them because we fought for them. Keep in mind also that right now overseas, they're not down with our war on terrorism and our proposed invasion of Iraq. They're worried far more about terror and its consequences from oil-stained warmongers in cowboy hats than they are from anybody in a turban. Chancellor Schroeder in Germany, for example, said Germany is willing to accept risks also in military terms, but not adventures. And what Bush and his cowboys clearly want is an adventure. But unfortunately, September 11th has fueled so much racism and anti-immigrant backlash in Europe that even the relatively slightly progressive leaders may go down one by one because of how clever and manipulative the organized racists are, especially in Holland and Germany and even places like Denmark, let alone France. But one country, such as Britain, not going along with an invasion of Iraq, that's all it takes to derail the whole scam. Like legs of a table, break off one leg, table spills over, scam is over. This worked beautifully in the not-so-distant past when the people who gave us the GATT treaty and the WTO, not even that was enough. They had to have something worse. So they were negotiating in secret the MAI, Multilateral Agreement on Investments, make it so not only individual countries can go to the WTO to nuke other countries' laws if they don't happen to like them, but corporations could go there too. Go to the WTO and say, we want blood money from this country for, quote, interfering with their right to profit. Through such things as minimum wage laws, environmental regulations, labor safety regulations, the right to organize a union, that would have to go. Any rights preventing Rupert Murdoch, Mickey Mouse, and Clear Channel from taking over the rest of the world's media, too. That would have to go. There was even a clause in the MAI saying that a corporation could shake a country down for blood money, no matter how poor that country was, for failure to quell civil unrest against the corporation. Well, some whistleblower leaks the text of the MAI treaty and what its purpose is onto the internet in France, and all hell breaks loose. Some over here through Global Exchange, Public Citizens, some of the unions. But in France, it got so hot, so much opposition, that the French government caved in and pulled out of the MAI treaty. And without France, the treaty was deemed unworkable, negotiations collapsed, they called the whole thing off. Solid proof that grassroots resistance can work. And then corporations decided, okay, we'll see how much of the MAI we can sneak into the GATT treaty, as it's written already, at the WTO meetings in Seattle. They never got that far. Too many people caused too much trouble in the streets. And those of us who were there, we had a great time, too. So they figure, okay, we'll show them. We're going to have the new WTO tribunal in Qatar. Tiny little Persian Gulf oil chic kingdom out on a peninsula in the middle of nowhere. Even there, they weren't safe. All these things they were trying to adopt into the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, the GATT treaty that created the WTO, they couldn't get it all in because the Trade Minister of India kept stonewalling and protesting and filibustering. Why? Because, according to the Wall Street Journal of all people, 25,000 protesters hit the streets in New Delhi and sent him a message right before he got on the plane to go to Qatar. Again, grassroots resistance can work. The way to get through to people on an individual basis that the war on terrorism is wrong is, number one, forgive the flags. We have freedom of speech in this country, number one, and it's a lot of people with good hearts just trying to express their grief and solidarity towards the victims and their families of an undeniable tragedy that is very real. On the other hand, the way to get through, even to people with the flags, that the war on terrorism is wrong, is to point out its piss-poor military strategy. All we're doing, even now in Afghanistan, let alone a badass invasion of Iraq, is planting the seeds for more bin Ladens more Al-Qaedas, and more suicide bombers, thus making our own country and our own homeland less and less and less safe. That is not good military strategy. Bin Laden says, you kill me, 100 more will grow on my place. We've already got 1,000 more, and it's growing and growing and growing. We don't want to create more Bin Ladens, even if it means waging peace to do it. One by one. Don't wait. Don't wait for Nightline or MTV or Fox News to persuade people that the war is poor military strategy. Don't hate the media, become the media. Not just with the underground zines and the independent media center and pirate radio and pirate TV, but one-on-one with people you know at home, work, school, family. Sit down with them. Talk to them. They spout Rush Limbaugh, George Bush, anti-immigrant, racist, anti-welfare bullshit. Don't dismiss them as unreachable. Sit down and talk to them. Even my girlfriend's stepmother, who's so far off the right-wing Republican scale, she's devoted a wing of the trophy home she lives in to a Republican museum with memorabilia of Reagan and Bush #1 and every different version of the American flag ever made, original editions and all. My girlfriend pointed out to her why the war on terrorism was poor military strategy. Even that woman stopped and said, you know, that's a good point. That is the way to get through to people that the war on terrorism is wrong. Bush is now scheduled sending 200,000 to 300,000 ground troops into Iraq for February. Not all of them are going to come home in anything but a body bag, so now is the time to start getting through to people that not only is the war on terrorism wrong, it needs to be opposed, actively opposed. As they say in show business, let's roll. Because now of all times is not the time to run around the world playing cowboy. But what really galls me is the people saying, Ralph Nader and the Green Party are the reason Gore lost the election. And if Gore was president right now, everything would be all better. Well, maybe they have a point if you look only superficially, because what was it, 500 votes separating Bush and Gore when our Supreme Court arbitrarily ended the recount and crowned King George, the next president? Contrasting that with 97,000 votes in Florida for Ralph Nader and almost 3 million nationwide. Superficially, they have a point, but when you look beneath that, hey, wait a minute. Nader and the Greens didn't cost Gore the election. Gore cost Gore the election. By driving so many of us who originally were gung-ho members of the Democratic Party into the hands of a third party, there's no way we were going to vote for anybody, even if Bush was the alternative, if the other supposed opponent was also pro-death penalty, pro-drug war, pro-WTO, pro-destroying the welfare benefits. Gore was also pro-Star Wars. There's no way I, for one, am going to vote for anybody who is that toxic and that far on the wrong side of things I care that deeply about. And people all over the world are mad as hell at Bush for pulling out of the Kyoto Treaty to combat global warming. Well, guess who went over to Kyoto when they were negotiating the treaty and tried to squelch it right then and there? Gore. Guess which one of those two guys came out in May of 2000 and said we should start teaching biblical creation in public schools again? Gore. Yeah. He said, it should not be in biology class. It should be in religion class. Trouble is, in American public schools, there's not a religion class, nor should there be. I mean, you want to study religion, why not the church of your choice, not the church of the government's choice? On top of that, Gore helped throw the elections by spending so much money running attack ads against Ralph Nader in California and other states he was already going to win the electoral votes for. He could have spent that money shoring up his support in states like Tennessee, Arkansas. If he'd won any one of these states, and of course Tennessee was his alleged home state, even though he grew up a pampered rich senator's kid in Washington, D.C., if he had spent money shoring up and won any one of those states, Florida wouldn't have mattered. But oh no, it's more important to bash the Greens. And when the Democrats helped pass Ashcroft's anti-terrorism bills designed to keep us all under surveillance and bust us for no reason, how much of an alternative to Bush were they ever in the first place in this day and age? It ain't the Greens that are spoilers. It's the corporate Democrats who keep selling down the Democratic Party's best principles to corporations. They're the spoilers. And there's another factor that cost Gore that election that nobody seems to want to acknowledge: his wife. Where was the youth vote? Where was rah-rah MTV Rock the Vote when Gore was running for president? Nowhere to be found. What is it, 10 years of makeover and people still remember that bitch the same way I do? That she has infiltrated and infected every one of our lives by marring our music collections with explicit lyric parental advisory notices, known to some of us as the tipper sticker. She had much more in mind when she and her main partner in founding the Parents Music Resource Center, the PMRC, held those anti-music hearings in the Senate in 1985. Tipper, who had compared herself to Ralph Nader as a consumer advocate, called herself a feminist and a liberal. She wanted a rating system that would not only rate sexual content, but V for violent, O for occult, which some of her religious right friends define as being Catholic or being Jewish, and wanted a special red flag rating for homosexual content, too. Funny how all the gay activists who are as mad at the Green Party as anybody because Gore isn't president don't seem to know that Gore's own wife, if not Gore himself, homophobic. Totally homophobic. I wonder if the West Memphis Three would be in jail doing life or on death row for a crime they quite likely didn't commit if it weren't for Tipper's hysteria about heavy metal a few years before. And people in Tennessee have told me that they get carded at Tower Records for trying to buy something with a Tipper sticker. What are you doing in Walmart in the first place, though? Walmart's going to protect the teenagers' fragile eggshell minds from songs about violence and gunplay. You can't have a song about getting violent with a gun at Walmart unless it's a country song, of course. But you can sure as hell go across to the sporting goods section of Walmart and get yourself a gun. Plenty of ammo, too. Family values on parade. Just like the family values Nazis just love the unborn, but once they're born, they don't care anymore. They don't want to fund the schools, but they're happy to put them in jail and happy to execute them. Family values on parade. Just like Tipper's friends. Perhaps you heard about a year or so ago, California was in the stranglehold of a really badass electricity and natural gas shortage, part of which was caused, of course, by people at a company called Enron turning off the gas to see how far they could drive up the price, and at the same time have a stooge like Cheney come out and say the solution to all this is to build more gas power plants, more coal power plants, and of course, more nuclear power plants. But Bush had this to say.
The California crunch really is the result of not enough power generating plants, and then not enough power to power the power of generating plants.
In reality, this one's a little more complicated. In effect, it wasn't the result of not enough power to power the power of the power plants. It was privatization gone wrong yet again. In San Francisco, I suddenly got hit with a January utility bill. Instead of the $70 to $100, it was almost $500. And this happened across the board to people on fixed incomes, poor people, senior citizens. You can pay the heat bill or you can starve. It's all your choice. But this didn't happen to people in Los Angeles or Sacramento or the adjacent cities in Silicon Valley of Santa Clara and Palo Alto, because those cities never privatized their power supply. They owned the electricity, they owned the gas lines and all, so they were secure. And they also send out information with your bill on how to conserve energy instead of finding ways to get you to waste more of it. But meanwhile, the rest of the state remains in the stranglehold of two private utility companies, Pacific Gas and Electric in the northern part of the state and in San Francisco where I live, or PG&E or Piggy&E for short. And the southern part, except for LA, has Southern California Edison. They decided they weren't already making enough money. You know, isn't it interesting with a lot of these corporate people, money does to them what crack does to other people, where after a while, all they can think about, since they've already made more money than they can ever figure out how to spend, is how to make, I gotta make more, I gotta make more, I gotta make more, I don't care who I hurt, I gotta make more. And instead of robbing a liquor store, they rob everybody. This is why I support the Green Party's platform calling for a maximum wage. To cure people of money addiction, you have to intercept it at the source. Put them through rehab. Anyway, PG&E and SoCal Edison, well, they thought they weren't making enough money already, so they wrote their own deregulation bill. Both houses of the California state legislature, Democratic dominated, passed their bill unanimously. And they claim it required them to sell off their power plants, but it actually didn't. They just had a fire sale on their in-state power plants to raise money to start buying up the plants and other properties in other states, thinking they were going to make some kind of a killing. But the out-of-state people who bought the California power plants realized, gosh darn, capitalism's great. Deregulation's even better. Why should we just keep the same price selling the juice to Piggy&E for $30 an hour when we could sell it to them for $60 an hour? That's working. How about $300 an hour? Duke Energy jacked it up at their power plant to $3,800 per kilowatt hour. Got away with it, too. This quickly put Piggy&E and SoCal Edison tens of billions of dollars into debt. And so they went whining to the governor, a Clintonoid Democrat whose first name best describes the depth of his vision for the future, Gray. Governor Gray Davis rubber-stamped through a bill handing these two utility companies $23 billion of taxpayers' money, estimated by some to reach 40 or 50 billion bucks by the time it's done, plus lock himself into buying electricity and natural gas from these people at rates far higher than anybody else in the country is paying these days, now that rates have fallen again. And I was thinking, what a waste. What a scam. Hey, look at the blackouts, Governor Davis. You better give us a multi-billion-dollar bailout or you're going to have to reset your VCR clock again and again and again.
If you're going to spend $23 billion on energy out of the blue, why not just give it to people so they can put solar panels on their houses for free? No more PG&E, no more SoCal Edison. And where it really gets sick is PG&E and SoCal Edison, thanks to deregulation, played a little shell game too, where they split up different parts of their company into their own little corporations, so that the two companies that are tens of billions in debt are PG&E Company and SoCal Edison Company, which are subsidiaries of PG&E Corporation and Southern California Edison Corporation. PG&E Corporation, according to the San Francisco Bay Guardian, was sitting on $34 billion in assets in other parts of the country, and they weren't kicking down PG&E Company one dime. Why bother when we can snatch it all from the public purse instead? California's got a budget surplus. Why don't we just cut off the electricity and take it all? And so far they've gotten away with it. So there was no electricity shortage or energy crisis. It was all manufactured by people like PG&E, SoCal Edison, and Enron. Bush, however, had this to say.
Natural gas is hemispheric. I like to call it hemispheric because it is a product that we can find in our neighborhoods.
Hey, if they get rid of all the pollution laws like they want, maybe there will be gas leaks in everybody's neighborhoods. And if you think we are alone in this fight against corporate feudalism, think again. A very conservative magazine available on all our commercial newsstands and many in other countries as well began getting some very interesting poll results a few years ago, such as even the people they polled, over half of them said the protesters in Seattle had a point. Then they take more polls in the 2000 elections and come back and say 72% of Americans, 72%, almost 3 in 4, say business has too much power and that corporations are invading too far into people's private lives and that huge corporate campaign contributions foster political corruption, undermine democracy, and people feel overworked and underpaid, especially in contrast to their CEOs at the head of the companies who now make nearly 500 times their average employee's wage. By far the biggest gap of any industrialized country in the world. And people feel increasingly threatened by the actual products and services sold by corporations. And even these people said, corporate America, ignore this at your peril. First, corporations should get out of politics. Second, they damn well better quit acting like Cheney and Kenny Boy and start spreading the wealth, too. Guess who said this? Business Week, in a cover story titled, Too Much Corporate Power. Boy, did Ralph Nader have fun with this on the campaign trail, too. This puts Business Week to the left of the Democratic Party. And there's a lot of things each of us can do to fight corporate feudalism just in our own private lives. Not everybody has the time or the guts to do what people like Judy Berry and Daryl Cherney and Global Exchange and the frontline people who break the barriers in places like Quebec City and Seattle and Geneva and all. Not everybody can do that. But there's other things we can do and still be a part of overturning corporate feudalism. Don't let the more radical than thou tell you that just because you're not doing as much or the same thing that they are means that you're worthless. Doing something is always better than doing nothing. And when you think about it, It's so easy. Here's the starting point. Should you decide to do so, just make a little vow to yourself. I am not cooperating with corporations anymore. They can't have me. Starting with, don't give them your money anymore. As much as humanly possible, which in a city this size is very possible, no more money to corporate chain stores. No more money to box stores, no more money to chain restaurants, no more money as much as humanly possible to products made and sold by predatory multinational corporations. For example, you're far more likely to find interesting music and not get carded for buying something with a tipper sticker on it at the independent music store. One would have local artists work in the store. Support the local bookstore instead of going to Borders and Buns and Nubile every time. And you might even run into a clerk who knows how to read and likes literature. Supporting the local markets instead of the supermarket chains oftentimes means you're getting locally grown produce, sometimes organic produce. And if it's organic, it means you're not going to be getting genetically mutilated frankenfood into your bag and the cornflakes where you don't know it's there and then into your mouth. Just don't buy that stuff. And on top of that, I know how hard it is to find work where you can actually make enough money to pay the rent, especially in this town, and not wind up being 50 years old and still living in a rat hole with roommates you can't stand. But try not to work for them. Don't give them your time, your intelligence, your energy. But if you must work for them, just remember that the computer age has ushered in a whole new frontier of sabotage on the job. Yeah. But if you start getting into this and try to get other people turned onto it and get them into it, don't wind up becoming a fundamentalist radical in the process. Fundamentalist, holier-than-thou radicals annoy me as much as fundamentalist religious people do. For the same reasons. It's all about absolutes, and the only way is their way, and if you're not like them, you're one of the evil ones and all. I've known so many people, especially in the Bay Area, who start out more radical than thou, more hardcore than thou, more punk than thou, more squat than thou, more anarchy than thou, more vegan than thou for 6 months, 2 years. Then something sets in. And they wind up, they're not only making other people miserable and turning other people off to perfectly good ideas in the process, they also are making themselves miserable. But they see things in the fundamentalist black and white blinders. There is no middle ground. There is no color. If I don't do everything exactly this way, I'm selling out. But God, I'm sick of this. I'm going to sell out all the way. See ya. Bye. It doesn't have to be that way. You find and pick out and explore a moral code, ethical code, and a lifestyle you can actually live with and live up to long term. It's far more likely to stick with you long term. If you go only this far on the radical meter instead of this far, it's less likely to turn into a mousetrap or a broken rubber band and go boing! And all of a sudden, you turn into the exact sort of SUV parasite you hated in the first place. It doesn't have to happen to you. And I do think as much as the government sucks, voting is important because it's our only chance to get in there that way and change it. Causing trouble in the streets is one part of the equation. Insurrection in the voting booth is the other part of the equation. The other important reason to vote in local elections are these ballot initiatives. We don't show up and vote for rent control every election in San Francisco. We give it away. You think medical marijuana or living wage laws would pass if we didn't show up and vote those ballot initiatives in? What got me back into voting, I'd quit voting for years. Reagan and Mondale, what a joke. Dianne Feinstein with no big opposition for mayor, that's not an election, that's a coronation. I refuse to vote anymore. Frank Zappa, among others, talked me back into it, emphasizing local elections. After all, the Christian right is very organized about these things. The Rush Limbaugh people, they vote. They're much more tenacious than we are. We'd rather party and have fun in life. They wake up every morning, as Michael Moore puts it, thinking of new ways to go out and screw the poor. Which also means if we aren't there to vote in school board elections, city council and board of supervisor elections, and state representatives, the Christian Coalition people are, in those little local elections, far less people vote, which means if we get organized, we can get cool people in, and otherwise we show up, we keep John Ashcroft's army from getting in instead. That's why we vote. I got back into it when I realized how much fun it was to vote against building new stadiums. Plus, even if you wind up in a real highfalutin, big money career track, doctor, lawyer, dentist, contractor, computer, website, genius, or whatever, one way of staying true to the roots and giving back to the community is giving back to the community. Just providing the services you make so much money from to people who can't afford it for free every once in a while. Some doctors do this. The lawyer who represented me in the Frankenchrist obscenity trial that none of the other dead Kennedys lifted a finger to help with, by the way, he did it for no fee. He said he did it because he wanted to give something back to his profession. Giving something back is part of not forgetting who you are, where you came from. And that's an important thing to hang on to. Look how many people your parents' age, my parents' age, or even our age haven't done that. The former members of my old band, here they are again, is the perfect example. Or, how many of you have crossed paths with a parent who's turned into something like, we had a great time when we were your age, smoking weed, fucking in the park, causing trouble in the streets, but now that you're that age, just say no. But take your Ritalin. The way to avoid becoming one of those people is just not to do it. So many people cross over into that without thinking about it when they either have kids and or buy property. And all of a sudden they have to protect what's theirs from, yes, the evil ones out there. And therefore, the money shouldn't go to the community, it should go to the stock market and to retirement funds. We're spending our kids' inheritance, ha 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 ha. You don't have to turn into one of them. Another part of becoming the media, both with kids and with adults, but especially with kids, cultivate bullshit detectors. Never has the media and mass culture we're exposed to been so censored as it is now, and so used as an instrument just to control our habits and our spending. And this is another thing, if you are or will become parents, don't hide reality from your kids. I'm 44 now, yes, believe it, it is true. An alarming number of people my age, and I noticed this when we were about 30 years old, no tangible, visible, personal memories of Vietnam or even Watergate. We were 16 by then. It was on everybody's lips. Vietnam, it was even in 5th grade. Everybody had a strong opinion on the war, even then, and now they don't remember it. Why? They love classic rock, but not classic history, even if it's their own history. Watch Brady Bunch reruns instead of remember their own lives, if you see my point. Maybe one of the reasons for this is because Eisenhower-ish parents, when the bloody footage of the troops bleeding all over the place in Vietnam came on the evening news back in the days when it was actually news, instead of Entertainment Tonight masquerading as news, and race riots were on the news, and the Biafra War in Nigeria, where I got my name, was on the news, those parents changed the channel to something nice so as not to upset the children. My family, this stuff was discussed, and I knew at an early age, this is what racism is. This is why it's wrong. This is what war really is. It's not like playing cowboys and Indians in the yard. This is what really happens, and this is why it's wrong. The more intelligent stuff you give people discussing these things intelligently when they're little, the more they're going to grow up to be conscientious, intelligent adults. Pure and simple. And part of that is bullshit detector, too. It was easy in my family because my dad would just snort and laugh at all the commercials. And, you know, son, that woman who's jumping up and down on TV, she isn't that excited about detergent. Detergent isn't that exciting. She's just trying to sell you detergent. I thought, And I applied that cynicism and bullshit detector to school and to my family, and then it really got wild. But I have no regrets. And that's especially important now when at early and earlier age, kids are being told what brand logo they have to have on their clothes to match the ones on their shoes, or they're not cool. But if you get them cynical enough, early enough, by the time they're teenagers and start thinking something must be wrong with them and they suck as a person just because they don't look like Britney Spears, you get enough cynicism for bullshit detector-equipped kids to see through fascism and the fashion police. By the time they're that age, they can say, I don't need that, I'd rather be me. I don't have to be taking steroids to look like Rambo. I don't have to wish I could get a boob job or always be on a diet because I might be a little bit bigger than a 22-inch waist or whatever. I'd rather be me. And one of the coolest things about Spirit of Seattle is that there's no big magical leader who's leading us all to the promised land. No Nelson Mandela, no Václav Havel, no Subcomandante Ski Mask riding in on a white horse to lead us all to the promised land. We're leading ourselves there. And that's a really important thing to hang on to. But one of the ways to hang on to that, it's not too egocentric to start thinking from time to time, okay, what would I do if I was in Bush's shoes right now? What would I want to say if I was debating Davis and Bill Simon? What would my priorities be? What would I do if I could trade places with Willie Brown, or trade places with the chief of police, or trade places with somebody on the school board, or be in place of the boss I hate so much at work? How would I run the place differently and make it work? Not only what do I not like, but start thinking about, okay, what do I want and how could I get it? How could we implement this stuff and actually make it work? At the very least, you're not going to come up with a magic answer every time, but it'll help make you smarter and start asking questions to other people and getting those ideas, and you'll identify where your skills lie, where your talents lie, that other people may not have the same knowledge that you do, because when corporate train wreck happens, it'll happen as quick and as unexpectedly as the fall of the Berlin Wall. And if we aren't ready to know how to run the thing, sit on our ass, wait for somebody else to do it instead, we will get fooled again. So on that note, we are out of time. We will turn into pumpkins unless we leave the buildings. Don't give up. And for people who come up to me, you changed my life. Maybe. But now it's your turn.
Meanwhile, I gotta at least say something about somebody we all sort of knew or felt we knew that passed away recently. To flash back a bit, used to be that Colorado was overrun with horrible country rock when I was a teenager. Firefall lived in Boulder. Sharing a town with them was quite nauseating. Hey, Stephen Stills lives here now. Cool. Joni Mitchell and Joe Walsh are moving to town. Country rock and jazz fusion were just forced on everybody. No all ages venues for the most part. And all these different country rock next big things were all showcased at this place called Ebbets Field in Denver, a place where there was no room for anybody to dance, I might add. And then one fine day I noticed second on the bill, opening for a record company band called Night City. God, what a great creative name, Night City. Was a band called the Ramones. I wasn't quite sure what to think of the Ramones yet. I picked up their first album in a dollar bin when it came out. Oh, this looks like it might sound like Iggy or MC5 or New York Dolls. I'll take this home. Couldn't believe how short the songs were and how the guy sang. And then you look at the lyric sheet conveniently provided. Beat on the brat with a baseball bat. Oh yeah, one song. Now I want to sniff some glue. Now I want to have something to do. Another song. And not one goddamn guitar solo, man. Couldn't believe it. And so I take the Ramones album around to friends of mine's houses, and after doing a bong hit or two or three, when we would normally go space out on psychedelic or progressive rock music, and I don't mean Yes or any of that crap, put the Ramones on and we would all kind of laugh at it. But then I thought, wait a minute, something's kind of up with this too. So we all went down to see the Ramones, and lining the front row of Ebbets Field, people who were hip to the Ramones. Oh, who was there? Joseph Pope, who was in a San Francisco band called Angst later on. Went to high school with him. The people who started the Wax Trax label later in Chicago, they were there. Al Jorgensen says he was there. He was living in Colorado at the time, but none of us knew him then. And then the rest of Ebbets Field was filled with the country rock glitterati. The local I am a music executive people, which in the 70s meant feather hairdos, Kenny Loggins beards, corduroy suit jackets with patches on the elbows, you know, music professionals. And their dates had all had their hair done 20 style with a flower because Joni Mitchell was looking like that then. All ready to have a nice, mellow, quiet evening. Then these four grubby-looking guys in leather jackets, who we all thought were brothers at the time, and torn jeans walk onto the stage, and a few eyes start to raise in the gallery of Ebbets Field. Then Johnny hits the chord on the guitar, one chord, and I knew it was going to be a fuck of a lot louder than any of us ever thought it was going to be. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, and the whole place blew up. We weren't allowed to dance. Everybody just had to sit there. And at first the sound was terrifying. It was so loud. And then I was like, oh my God, they're really, really good. And then I had to turn around and see what the rest of Ebbets Field looked like. And all these people, no, make them stop. Yes, yes, yes. Not only were they so fucking intense, but they made it look so simple. It was like, God, Joey has the same microphone move over and over and over again, just like he did till the Ramones stopped playing. It was like, anybody could do that. I could do that. This is something I would actually like to do. I don't have to listen to Black Sabbath and kill myself after all. This is something to look forward to. Then Joseph Pope came back out. I was just in the dressing room talking to the Ramones. Talking to a rock musician, a real live rock musician, they'll talk to us? I couldn't believe it. They would actually talk to me, this anonymous teenage nobody, mainly Joey, who I shot the shit with for quite a while. Leave Home had come out that week, so I went out and got that one and then got him to sign it the next night, which I'd never had anybody do before, but felt this is the beginning of something really, really important, and I'm so glad I'm going to get to fucking be there. Maximum Rock and Roll has said it's a plot by rock stars to mind fuck the poor innocent fans. Well, I still sign shit for people because of how much it meant to me when Joey and the Ramones signed my records back in January of 1977. I don't know how many of us would be here tonight, certainly not me, if it weren't for Joey and the Ramones. God damn, I'll miss that man. Thank you, Joey Ramone.
How did we get stuck with this guy in the White House in the first place? I think we're all intimately aware of all the entertainment that went on in the state of Florida. To me, it was a typical Florida election, only this time they got caught. Wouldn't surprise me if the old Jewish lady ballots got thrown into the canal in every election. How many of you know who Herschel Gordon Lewis is? Filmmaker Herschel Gordon Lewis, 2000 Maniacs. Yeah, he was a pioneer of low-budget gore in a very spectacular fashion. Blood Feast, Color Me Blood Red, and 2000 Maniacs. And guess where Lewis was from? Florida. And the plot of 2000 Maniacs is these rootin'-tootin', out-of-control youth in their hopped-up convertible find a road not on the map, in Florida, of course, and they come into this little town that's not on the map, and there's all this red, white, and blue flag-waving stuff. Hey, you're just in time for our jamboree! Come on in! Woo-hoo! You're gonna love our jamboree! And they quickly learn that the jamboree means destroying each and every one of them as part of the celebration. First, a woman's obviously plastic mannequin arm gets chopped off on a table and some store-bought meat is hanging out with a little bit of blood. And then they tie one of the guys down and drop a giant rock on him and squish him. Woo-hoo! This is the best jamboree we've ever had! Yee-haw! And then they put another guy in a barrel full of nails and roll him down the hill till it's all bloody. This is the greatest jamboree of them all! Finally, a couple of the people escape, and as they look behind them, the town evaporates, the road disappears into thin air, and all that's left is a little marker saying that during the Civil War, Union soldiers massacred a southern town here, but the South shall rise again. Imagine the cast of 2000 Maniacs in charge of an election, and that's what we got in Florida. Gore didn't help his own cause very much either, did he? Bitching and moaning and groaning about what was going on in South Florida, but for some reason couldn't be bothered to make a bigger stink about the bigger scandal in northern Florida, where Lewis used to shoot his movies, where the cops were blocking off streets in selected neighborhoods and asking people for 5 pieces of ID if they made it past the roadblock for the crime of attempting to vote while black. And if somebody did manage to come up with 5 pieces of ID, and only black people got asked this, then they had to check the convicted felons list. Sorry, boy, you're on the list as a convicted felon. It's best you go on home where you belong. But wait a minute. I'm a minister. That's my church right over there. I've never been arrested in my life. You're on the list, boy. It's best you go back to your place if you know what's good for you. Found out a lot of interesting things in Florida. When I went to Tallahassee in Florida, at Florida State University, literally across the tracks is the so-called black school, Florida A&M, mostly African-American students, 8,000 to 10,000 of them there, and those who lived on campus, meaning most of them, they were supposed to vote in the student union. Come Election Day 2000, the student union was locked up with nothing posted as to where people could go to vote. Why didn't Gore protest that? Was he allergic to being photographed with civil rights leaders or something? I don't know. There's a book out now on the Florida elections called The Best Democracy Money Can Buy by Greg Palast, who also writes for the British Guardian. He and his people got hold of some documents none of the American media bothered to read that showed that Katherine Harris, the Secretary of State for Florida, who was in charge of the election, who was also King George II's campaign manager for the state of Florida, hired a private firm months before the election to figure out a way to purge the voter rolls of so-called convicted felons, meaning mostly African Americans. But it turned out when Palast looked at some of these records, it showed people weren't allowed to vote because they were convicted of felonies in 2004 and 2007. Check that out. This is what democracy really looks like. That election was so stage managed that Bush was crowned our next president in the corporate press 2 years before the election. They're already saying, oh, it's inevitable. This is the man. This is the guy who's going to win. And then they have the presidential debates that are so stage managed, but for the most part, it was Bush and Gore agreeing with each other. Who could be more right-wing?
I executed more people as governor of Texas than any governor in history.
Oh, that's great. I like executing people too. I don't like immigrants too. As a matter of fact, I was the one who persuaded Clinton to sign Newt Gingrich's welfare bill, kicking poor people and single mothers and kids in particular in the teeth and throwing them in the streets. See, ain't I great?
That's just fine. We don't like those people in Texas either. Don't mess with Texas.
Another one they didn't even call Bush on in the debates at all was when he said in the second one,
"You're talking about Social Security like it's some kind of federal program."
It is a federal program.
I mean, there needs to be a wholesale effort against racial profiling, which is illiterate children.
But what do they say instead? Oh, I refer you again to the USA Today. Well, Gore appeared more knowledgeable on the issues, but Bush appeared more likable. Appeared more likable. Therefore, he won. And of course, Ralph Nader of the Green Party was not allowed in the debates at all. They changed the rules. Up until 2000, if you had over 5% of the vote in pre-election opinion polls, you got in. Thus, Ross Perot got to debate Clinton and King George I and prove on national television that, yes, the flying saucer crashed at Roswell in 1947 and the alien still walks amongst us. Soon as Nader's over 5% of the polls, what do? They raise the barrier to 15%. And the Democratic and Republican flunkies were asked, hey, wait a minute. Aren't you rigging the rules here to stifle freedom of speech and people's access to all sides of the story and access to information? No, say the Democratic Party and Republican Party flunkies. It's not our fault. The Debate Commission makes the rules. The Debate Commission is a private corporation owned by the Democratic and Republican parties. So people go to the Debate Commission, yo, what's up with rigging the debates like this and thus playing a role in rigging the whole damn election? Is this democracy? Well, we don't make the rules. We can't change the rules. Our sponsors make the rules. AT&T, Yahoo.com, Budweiser Beer. We can't go against the wishes of our sponsors. Maybe the closest thing to a truthful statement a Democratic or Republican Party flunky said during that whole election. We can't go against the wishes of our sponsors. So, a patriotic American who was given a ticket to be in the audience at the first debate in Boston gives his ticket to Ralph Nader just to sit in the audience and observe. Everybody else with a ticket is allowed in. Nader is blocked by the police and threatened with arrest if he attempts to use his ticket just to sit in the audience. So then he goes and gets a press pass from Fox TV. All the other reporters and crew from Fox are allowed into the building. Nader stopped by the police and threatened with arrest. If I were him, I would have pulled a Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King and allowed them to arrest me at that point, and that would have gotten on TV as to how undemocratic this whole thing is. The old saying, this is what democracy looks like. Next time, Ralph, get arrested. Anyway, that was how hell-bent they were on keeping him out. Same with St. Louis, same with the third one. Is that what democracy looks like?